Transportation Commission meeting to order for December 14th, 2022. And Stefan, if you please read our instructions.
Yep. All right. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the commission, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked the question. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair Kovich, floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Aiden, if you call a roll, please.
Sure thing. So Alder Miazzi.
Present.
And Ann Kovich.
Here.
Chris McCahill.
I think he said here, but I can see him.
Sorry. Yep.
Sorry. Robbie Weber, I think, who is in an update right now, it looks like. Bridget Brown. Who I see on what?
Bridget, can you hear us?
Yeah, Bridget Brown here. Sorry about that. Having a little tech trouble.
Okay.
Denise Jess.
Here.
Bill Bremer. Who I don't see yet. Darren Wozniewski.
Present.
I see Robbie just joined.
I was put in as a non-panelist, so I had to go out and come back in.
Oh, okay. Oh, that darn tech update. Okay, so we...
The
Go
last
ahead.
three, Alder Harrington McKinney, Patricia Bennett, and Harold Gleams are all excused for tonight.
Okay, thank you so much. Now Denise has to leave early for another meeting. So hopefully everybody else can stay. I think we have 7 at the moment. Perhaps Bill will be able to join us, but anyway, we need 5 for a quorum. So we should be good, but hopefully nobody else has to leave early. We don't want to lose our quorum. Okay, thanks. Everybody have a chance to look at the minutes from the last meeting.
Move for approval.
Okay, there's a motion. Denise, is that a second?
It is.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Robbie, is that discussion or was that a second?
That was a second, just trying to lower my hand.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to raise a hand to object. Chris?
I'm just going to abstain. I haven't had a chance to look through that meeting.
Okay. So we'll show you as abstaining. Anybody else? Okay.
Ann, I just came back on. What was just the action that you were just doing?
The minutes from the last meeting?
I have not received them yet.
Aiden sent them out today, I believe. Did you not?
And
Aiden?
I did not get them. So I'll abstain from the minutes.
Okay. So if Chris abstains and Bill abstains. So we would have 1, 2, 3, 4 people who would vote in favor. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and we have 7 people here. So according to my calculations, the motion would carry without me needing to vote. Steve, would you correct me if I'm wrong on that? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people here. So that requires 4 votes to pass a motion.
You are
And-
correct.
Okay, so the motion is carried. And we'll show Chris and Bill abstaining. And Aiden, if you could just send out the minutes again so that people have them. I know you sent them because I got them, but if you would send them again so everybody has them, that would be appreciated. Okay, do we have anybody registered for public comment this evening under item 1 for something not on the agenda?
Not for item 1.
Okay, can you just tell me who we have people registered for so that I can mark my agenda?
There's one person registered not wishing to speak for item 4, and one person registered wishing to speak for item 9.
Item 9, okay, all right. Okay, thanks, Aiden. All right, so disclosures and recusals this evening. Okay, seeing no hands. We'll move on to item number 2, which is the annual review of winter bike maintenance. I think we have Brian, Ryan, and Greg here this evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Welcome and go ahead.
I know there's a slides. Ryan or Greg, were you going to share them? I thought Kathy was going to be joining us and steering it, but I don't know.
I don't see a Kathy
Okay.
on Zoom.
Well, no worries. I can share my screen real quick then. And so Greg and Ryan, when it's your turn to speak, you just have to tell me when to advance the slides, okay? And 1 sec. Okay. Okay, wait a minute. What's going on? There we go. Everybody see the facility maintenance
We can, yes.
point? Okay, good. I messed this up recently with the presentation, so so far I'm doing much better than my last time. This is very good news.
Okay.
So yeah, so we're just so my name is Brian Johnson. I'm the recycling coordinator and public information officer for the streets division. Myself, Greg Jenin with Parks, and Ryan Schmidt from the engineering division, giving just an update on where the bicycle facility maintenance processes are for this year, like just the annual update. So I'm going to handle the streets division part. Then Greg is going to do the parks division section, and then Ryan will have the engineering section as well. So for the streets and urban forestry, I'm up first. And so when it comes to the first thing we talk about is the sweeping, the street sweeping that's handled on our paths. Really, nothing's changed from last year with the sweeping, where during the winter months, we do have a smaller piece of equipment. It's not the one shown in the photo, but you kind of get the idea of what it is, where we're able to use that to sweep up the excess sand that accumulates off the off-street paths as well. During the winter months, off street paths are swept with that small machine, but the on-street paths, we are unable to sweep those. The bigger street sweepers can't operate in the winter, so we don't use those. Obviously, we can't use them. Plus, they're also shipped out for this yearly maintenance overhaul in the winter months, so we just don't even really have them on hand to take care of any on-street bike lanes. During the warmer months, the off-street paths are swept regularly, like I said, once every 3 weeks or so, with the equipment shown in the photo there. And then the on-street lanes are swept fairly regularly as well. Like it's about, in the Clear Streets, Clean Lakes area, which is the downtown core isthmus area, any on-street paths there, like bike boulevards and that, are going to be swept weekly. And outside of that isthmus, Clean Street, Clean Lakes area, every 10 days or so, give or take, depending on equipment availability, breakdowns, and things like that. But they're swept really regularly. Also, like with urban forestry being part of the streets division now, we've actually been able to do a little better job when it comes to pruning. We've been able to be a little faster with it, because before, whenever the Parks Division was where urban forestry was housed. Sometimes a lot of foresters would wind up being the ones driving the haul trucks to haul the brush around. Right now, we're able to use Streets Division staff to drive those haul trucks to get more foresters to pruning more trees. So we're able to speed that process up and kind of do more of that proactive pruning. And then, as you can see the slides there, responding to complaints if low branches happen to get in the way, and working with the parks if any sort of maintenance of the path or removals are necessary, and making that work. And also the change as far as the maintenance goes. Most of the on-street bike lanes are on what's called the salt routes. So those major thoroughfares in Madison. Those are the roads that are salted and plowed every time snow falls, like what's probably going to happen later tonight, actually. Then the last lap on the salt route, the operators are directed to push the snow out of that bike lane to kind of push that all the way out to the curb. Realistically, though, like the bike lanes are generally going to be snowy, though, because the way the roads are built, they're built where the snow and slush from cars and everything are going to the curbs, and that's where the bike lanes are. So that's naturally going to accumulate there. Also, we are never going to salt the bike lanes directly because of the salt effect on all of our waters, including the water we drink. Putting salt directly in that bike lane would just wash it straight into the storm drains, which we don't want to do. And really just to kind of keep those salt lanes open at all, it takes the temperatures for the salt to work, time for the salt to take hold, and also just traffic to clear them off like that. The one change that did certainly happen last year to this year was we sort of reimagined what's called the quadrants. Really, it's a sextant because it's 6 pieces of the pie, but where we sort of chopped up the way the city, because many of the facilities from like bus stops to the city sidewalks and lanes and things like that, it's really a shared responsibility between streets, parks, and engineering. And we all take a slice of the city to do it all. And on the map here is what the quadrant map is. Now, the map is a little deceptive. Like the city central area is white for engineering. That doesn't mean they plow every street within there. They're just doing the bus stops and the facilities that are within there. And the purple and blue areas are the ones done by the Streets Division. The white areas are engineering, and then the yellow, orange, and green are done by the Parks Division. Like most of it was sort of fussing with some of the boundaries to get a little bit faster some of the response. But one of the bigger and more notable changes is the contraflow lane. That is something that's now done by the Streets Division, the contraflow lane, and also that protected bike facility on Bassett Street. The Streets has a standing overnight crew now. We've had the past couple of years, and we're able to help keep those lanes open a little bit better as a result of that. So we've taken on that responsibility, even though it's in the middle of engineering's area, is something the Streets still able to do. And that's really all that I had. So Ryan and Greg, looks like you guys are up next.
Okay, that would be me. My name is Greg Jenin. I'm the operations manager for the Parks Division. I'll present a couple of slides and then turn it over to Ryan to present some additional information. If you could click to the first slide. As Brian pointed out, some of the information on the slides remains the same. I'll highlight the things that have changed so you can differentiate, make it hopefully easy. We continue to clear the priority arterial path by 7 a.m. Monday through Friday, excluding weekends and the holidays. But hopefully any biker will find that they're pretty well cleaned by 7 a.m. We will continue. So again, pointing out that these are things that we continue to do in the past. Clear on the weekends and holidays within 12 hours after the snow stops falling. So it's a judgment call. I know some would question, has it stopped, hasn't it stopped? We'll get out there as soon as we feel like it's stopped enough to clear the path without redoing. We continue to utilize the new toolcat that was supported by the bike path for snow clearing. That's greatly appreciated. The equipment is so important, and it allows us to do a better job with the growing requirements for the bike paths. We also we did the territory responsibilities, reviewed them for quality and quantity efficiencies, as Brian pointed out in his slide. That was a change this year. And we increased the use of broom clearing to allow conditions to reduce salt and sand use, which also allows us to clear a little bit better when we don't have the deep, heavy snow. We can hit it pretty quick with the broom and get it right down the pavement. And then this is new, piloted a new gas UTV with a V plow to increase the response time. And one of the first questions that sometimes comes to mind is, what about EV? Because we are totally committed to the new EV technology where it makes sense. We're continuing to evaluate that, and where it makes sense, we will continue to evolve to EV equipment to support bike path clearing. Some of the outcomes are noted there as the reduce in snowpack. The faster we get it off, the less snowpack we have, and we increase accessibility during the weekends and holidays to improve the biker satisfaction. If there's no questions, Brian, we can go to the next. Salt-wise, Brian mentioned the use of salt. I just want to highlight that our staff that is working out on the salt on the bike paths do take salt-wise training to minimize the use of salt. And we do clear the secondary pass by 3 p.m. the day after the snow stops. I noted within budget because there could be some constraints that would slow that. But we are doing what we can to within the budget resources we have. And then a note on all paths that we use a 95 to 5% salt mix. So majority of it is salt. There's a little sand, excuse me, the majority is sand. There's a little salt in there, otherwise it would freeze in and be very difficult to use. It keeps it from freezing into the equipment. We use it judiciously. As I mentioned, the employees do go through salt-wise training. And it's at the discretion of staff. And complaints, I note. So we tried, and it's in the next part of the slide, to keep an eye on the paths. We do drive the paths once each day when it's snowing, and then daily after it stops. And we'll close the windrows that are formed by the streets. But also we respond to complaints. Now, it'd be great if we didn't have any, but sometimes just that biker on the path is going to see something that we haven't gotten to, and we'll respond as quickly as we can. Also, as our staff is out there, they're watching for slippery spots, black ice, other things that can create a hazard for a biker. And the next slide. And I'll turn that over to Ryan unless there's questions.
Good evening, everybody. Ryan Schmidt with the Engineering Division. I'm the Assistant Construction Supervisor. Brian, if you want to go to the first slide, please. So a big thing that we are looking into is you can see two examples here of the contraflow, which is on the right side, as well as the Bassett Street protected bike lane on the left, and how operations and the engineering design team are consulting with each other to get feedback as far as an operation standpoint, what makes more sense with clearing snow and protected bike lanes or any of the bike facilities. You can see on the contraflow, where we have limited areas to push the snow, as well as parking, as in addition to having room for the bikers, more space obviously creates more bikeable surfaces for our residents. If you want to go to the next slide, Brian. So all of our bike paths have a condition assessment every 2 years. The rating scale is a 1 to 10. Currently, all of our bike paths have a rating of the average rating is 8 for the bike paths on the arterials. Then resurfacing, that's programmed into our capital budget for repairs and obviously resurfacing those surfaces. Thank you. One more.
Did I get ahead of you, Greg? I'm sorry. Are we good?
I appreciate you navigating it, Brian. So this is just a graph that kind of shows the report problems since it started in 2008, which this number probably doesn't reflect as many as we had because this is when the report problem program first started. So those numbers are lower, and you can see through the years the number of report problems that the city has received. This is all the report problems. So some of the additional slides will show kind of a breakdown. And then obviously 2020, the pandemic year, a lot more people are out. So I think we had a lot more report problems. But we'll have a little bit more of a breakdown of some of the report problems on the next slide. So you can see the averages here. I'm not sure if everybody can see the full right side of the screen, but there's different colors for what the reports are. The majority of our reported problems come in the form of debris or encroachments on the bike paths. And we can see in the light blue, the number of reported problems related to snow and ice on our bike facilities. We've reduced those numbers significantly, and I think it's a lot of the things that Brian and Greg have touched on with the departments working more integrated department-wide to be on the same page with their snow removal, the practices that we do, the equipment that we use. This is just more of a little bit more of a breakdown for the last 2 years of how those reported problems came across. As you can see, the snow and ice, we are under 20 reported problems for both 21 and 22. So I think for the city of the size that we're at, to have that many reported problems in the 2 years, I think we're doing a pretty good job of, making those facilities better for everybody. And I think the last one, this is just more touching, it's getting a little bit of percentages of what we see and what those reported problems, more numbers for that. Again, the majority of them are obstructions and debris. The broken glass, I think, is probably one of our big ones, but I think the streets department does a very good job of responding and getting those up quickly. And one thing to note with these two is that sometimes these numbers are, it's the same report from numerous different people too, which we didn't really take into effect with some of those numbers. So the numbers are even probably a little bit lower than what we're showing on our graphs. So these are, again, some of the numbers that I touched on already for the 21 and the 22 reported problems. So 6.8% in 21 were 15 total reported problems, and 22 we had 15 reported problems, totaling 6.3% of the actual reported problems reported for snow and ice. And questions?
Anybody have questions for staff? Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I think maybe 2 quick questions. The first one is about snow clearing on the trails. Obviously, we do a great job in the city of clearing those paths nice and early. One of the things that happens though is it's where the road meets the path, and then maybe the plows come through after, and then you get snow buildup or ice right at the road crossing. I'm just kind of curious, like, is there a process for going back throughout the day on some of these paths, even though you're out there early on a lot of them?
I can take that answer or question. To answer the question, yes, we definitely have crews out. We work on, especially with Parks and Engineering, we're responsible for most of the bike path snow removal, coordinating a start time so it's cohesive between the departments, or as close as we can with our staff and some of our budgetary constraints. What that staff will do is typically an early start, like so for the storm that's coming up tonight, we've staffed employees that will come in, hopefully timing about the time the storm starts. Their main priority during the snow event would be opening up the main, so that would be going back over. So as the streets or arterials or salt routes are plowed, trying to open up those aprons. And then throughout the storm, obviously there's continuing to do that. Usually when the snow starts to taper off where it ends is when crews will really go back and start focusing on that. And then if streets goes general plow, or we know there's going to be pushbacks, our crews are redispatched. And I can say this is probably true for parks as well. We do a couple days after that, we are all back with crews, at least inspecting it. In a lot's case, going through and cleaning those windrows up. In engineering, we have an actual route for the windrows. So if there's a general plow that's called by streets, we will send our crews back out to address just that windrows, and that's what they're really looking for. Crossings, anything that we have on the bike path that could be a conflict with traffic, that's obviously a high priority for us.
Great. Awesome. Thanks. Other thing is, I was just curious, I don't think we can get into this now, but it would be helpful maybe in the future to be able to see the arterial path network and be able to sort of take a look at that and see what counts as an arterial path, and are we making additions to that in order to make sure that sort of the network is complete. So I don't know. I don't think there's anything we can dive into here now, but I think there may be some connections like along the Yahara River that might deserve another look.
Yeah, I think we can definitely look into that. I don't have the map obviously available to show you where their arterials currently are. But yeah, that's definitely something that could be looked into. Renee and some of our engineers would probably be good people to loop into that conversation too, that would be responsible for the design and the install of those as well.
Okay, thanks. That's all you had then, Chris? Okay, Robbie, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm kind of curious, what is our current policy on towing cars during snow emergencies if they don't move? Because I think that would make a big difference on getting to the curb and freeing up some of those bike lanes. So I don't see a lot of towing, and I think that might make a difference in the fact that we get narrower and narrower streets in some parts of the city. And that includes the bike lanes kind of disappearing.
I
Thanks.
think a lot, that's definitely a parking enforcement question, and that they're not present, so I don't want to speak too much for them, but yes, I don't think Taylor's on here anywhere, it doesn't seem to be. But a lot of whenever snow emergencies are declared and when towing occurs, predominantly that's going to happen on the isthmus area for the most part. It could happen really anywhere where people can get a snow emergency ticket, but it tends to be focused there because there's just, the streets are so narrow, it's so difficult for plows to move around, and so those, and a lot of the towing capabilities it's staffing related, how many people they can get on, and how many the towing tow trucks can the towing company bring to us to commit to the event, and depends on the severity of the event sometimes too. Like this most recent snow emergency, I don't believe anyone was towed for it. They did ticket 300, almost 400 people, I think, got tickets for that, but I don't believe anyone was towed for this particular snow emergency event though. But it's something that we bring them on, or it's park enforcement can bring them on when it's possible, like whenever it's, especially after the snow was built up for a little bit, if it really needs to be towed, is something that we certainly like stress with parking enforcement to try to bring them on here at streets. But yeah, I see, understand your point though. And I think too with the Clean Streets, Clean Lakes plowing as well, that's something that after snow emergencies, or even just any time, on that with those CSCL parking restrictions, that's a little easier to ticket and tow as well, because like daytime availability is just a little simpler. And so then if people are parked in those, like where those 4-hour once weekly parking restrictions exist, we can get a little faster on that, and those people can also be towed as well if need be. It's not nothing that they don't have to necessarily be scofflaws or have so many tickets outstanding before they get towed. If you're in violation, you can be towed for something. But again, I would probably be more comfortable if someone from parking enforcement answered all the towing questions, but doing my best.
I mean, I'm not, nobody wants to be towed. It's kind of a last ditch thing, but I think that sometimes we wait until things get so bad that it's almost impossible to then remove the snow because it's gotten hardened, it's melted and refreezed, and so you get ice, chunks and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, other cities are serious about towing on routes where they need to clear the snow. And I think sometimes we just kind of say, well, okay, we'll ticket you every other day, but then we won't do anything when it really does snow and we need to clear the snow. So again, I think that it would be, especially in areas where we prioritize, where maybe we have a prioritized biking route as well as a bus route, maybe we need to start thinking about preparing for getting the tow trucks out. I mean, they certainly are available at 4:30 or 4 o'clock on every city street that has restricted rush hour parking restrictions. They're there at 4:01 and they're towing those cars. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. And generally, I wouldn't necessarily advocate towing cars, but it seems that it's getting in the way of some of our street clearing. And I think that's kind of important. Thanks.
I think one of the things to consider with the towing too is it's something that's a private company that provides for the city. So I don't know what's baked into the contract with what MPD or the parking enforcement people, whenever they get the contractors to come up and what they're able to commit to. I don't know how that piece of it works. And that could be one of the differences too between other cities and in ours. Like, I don't know if these other cities have their own, like, is it a municipal towing force that's hitting it? That might be different than what commitments they get from private companies, or that's could be part of the like under the hood complications of the whole thing too. And plus, like, some of these places have, like, I know Minneapolis has like an impound lot for that kind of stuff. Like, we don't, when vehicles are towed here at Madison for these parking violations, they're towed to the next parking spot, really. And then they're like one street over, like for snow emergency towing, they're just moved to the next legal parking spot. So, I mean, there's, like I said, I've been taking notes too, Robbie, so I wrote all that stuff down. But I think a lot of the sort of towing and parking enforcement questions might be best for a PEO supervisor.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else have any other comments or questions for staff? Okay, well, we very much appreciate the update, and I think you've gotten some good feedback from people. And every time we hear from you, the report's a little bit different, and there's some new things going on. So we appreciate hearing from you. Anything else before we let these folks go? Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good
Thanks.
evening.
Okay, next we have Feathers Edge Sidewalk. Who's going to be doing that this evening?
Hi, everyone. This is Reed Stitley with City Madison Engineering. I will share my screen. Moment. Are y'all able to see this PDF?
Yes, we can.
Great. So again, thank you. I'm Reed with City Madison Engineering. I brought this project for feedback about a year ago, TC 1117 last year, and we had great feedback then. And in general, we've progressed with that plan as we had discussed then. Tonight, I'm bringing I guess a fairly minor change to the project, and I just have it very basically outlined here on this sheet. So previously, this project is proposing to extend, as a recap, this existing stub of Feathers Edge Drive between Soaring Sky and Meadow Road. This is part of a street project that's also kind of linked with some other pond projects for flood mitigation purposes and storage. But as far as the street portion of the project, we are still planning on going forth with this 28-foot wide street connection between Soaring Sky and Meadow Road here. The change that I'm bringing tonight for feedback is just removing or not placing, I guess, this the sidewalk on the north side of Feathers Edge, and only going forward with the previously proposed sidewalk on the south side of Feather Edge. This change came about as we progressed with design. There's actually a wetland channel that runs kind of northeast here between the proposed street and the proposed multi-use path. And what we found is with the in order to keep the street above the 100-year flood target, we were getting too far out with the toe of our slope, and we were encroaching upon this wetland. And so, in order to mitigate that, or actually in order to not impact that wetland channel at all with the street here, we need to pull that toe in a little bit. So by removing the sidewalk, we're able to, on that side, we're able to still meet that goal of designing for the 100-year flood event for the street. So not inundating the street at, that 1% chance. And we can still maintain sidewalk on the south side for a connection for folks that are trying to get down and around to Meadow Road and the other path connections that we have here. One other note here is just that there is an existing sidewalk stub out on the south side. Previously, we would have had to connect that all the way across up to Soaring Sky with a new stub that wasn't there. So this is more or less just tying into what's existing on that side. And there's still the multi-use path that runs close by the Feather Edge point here that we're still proposing with these street improvements. So that's the change. It's just to be I guess transparent in what we've all been working on and just the changes here. We just wanted to bring it back tonight to make sure that you're still okay, and if you had any feedback on that change.
Comments or questions for Reed? Bill, go ahead.
Thank you, Reed. I think it's a good change. I really don't see the need for the sidewalk on that north side. I think the sidewalk on the south side will be suffice, and like you say, most of that is an area that it's not really accessing to anything really need that sidewalk there. So I think moving all the people to the south side is perfectly fine. Thanks. I think it's a good change.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Any other comments or questions? Is that all you had, Bill? And I'm going to take your hand down. Whoops. Okay. Anybody have any other comments or questions for Reed? Okay, with our concern about sidewalks, we appreciate you bringing it back so that we can understand this update. And it looks like you're good to go.
Perfect. So thank you for your time.
You bet. All right. Move on to item 4. And we'll get a presentation from staff. And then this is one where I think you said we had somebody registered. Aiden, is that correct?
Correct. Registered, but not wishing to speak.
Okay, but we'll still get him into the record after we hear from staff. So why don't we hear who's up for this one?
This is me, Tom Moore.
Oh, hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Hi, good. So yeah, this is actually a resurfacing project. The limits are up at the square, Pinckney Street, down to Franklin, except that for pavement markings, we're going to go, including this project, all the way down to Blair Street. And it's a little bit confusing because there's different projects here and different things going on. But we're going to kind of treat it all as one big project with this pavement marking. So this would be the ultimate final lane configuration, which includes BRT center running between Butler and Blair, with the stations between Franklin and Blair. But with our project, we would set everything up for BRT, but I think we'll get done before the red pavement markings are needed. So we would probably, with this project, install everything except the red here, but this would be the ultimate. And the big difference here is that we would be proposing to remove the majority of the on-street parking and mark in on-street bike lanes. So I can start at the square and work our way down. So on this first block between Pinckney and Webster, we actually have enough street width to maintain parking on one side. So we propose to do that. The block between Webster and Butler would essentially stay the same because this outbound side currently had, or up until a couple weeks ago, had a bus pull out, so there was no on-street parking here, and we can maintain the parking on the inbound side. Between Butler and Hancock, this is next to the Brayton lot, so all of these on-street metered parking stalls would be removed. Between Hancock and Franklin, we would remove the existing parking stalls. And then between Franklin and Blair, there were no stalls or no on-street parking on the outbound side. And we think we can maintain the parking on the inbound side. And one little change here is that this curb bump out next to Blair would be extended for a relocated bus stop. So right now the current bus stop is on the near side of the intersection, so it's going to move to the far side. And that's kind of the overview. We plan on having a public information meeting tomorrow night to discuss this, but we're looking for approval of this proposed lane configuration layout.
Are you actually looking for a motion from us, Tom, just to clarify?
I guess this is actually here for.
It's just here for review and feedback, was my understanding.
Feedback. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yep, you're right.
All right, cool. We have Robbie first. Go ahead. Or wait, yeah, excuse me. Before we get going with questions, can you just read the registrant for us, Aiden?
Sure. It is Nicholas Davies of Richard Street, Madison, Wisconsin, supports and does not wish to speak.
Okay, thanks. So we have that in the record. Robbie, go ahead.
So I apologize if it's in here, but I was having a little trouble reading the lane widths on some of these. Where the bike lane is next to the parking, what is the combined width of that?
Let's see.
So parking and bike lane.
Got this pulled up on another screen. Let me quick check that. So here on this block, this is 15 feet. So it'd be parking bike lane 15 feet next to a 10-foot travel lane. And then on the inbound side, we have a 7-foot bike lane with a 2-foot buffer and 11-foot travel lane.
13-foot travel lane, it looks like, but
I think that
oh, that includes the buffer.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the striped width of the bike lane on the, I guess that would be the south side. I don't know whether that's south or whatever. On the other side where there is parking, is that going to be 5 feet or is that going to be 7 feet or what?
So I think we had, I think what this is showing here is 5 feet, which puts it about a foot or two off the existing parking stalls. So, so we've got, it would be, I think what this is showing is 5 and 10 actually, but we could narrow that.
Yeah, I think the issue is if we can stripe the lane a little bit wider, because it'll discourage people opening their doors into the bike lane, or it'll give people a little more space to avoid the door. That's kind of the issue there. And if you stripe the lane wider and the parking lane narrower, then it encourages people to actually park closer to the curb and remember that there's, be wary or aware that there are people using that for bicycling.
Yep, we can do that.
Okay, great. And is that the only place where there's I see there's one other place where there's the lane next to the parked cars.
Yeah, so this location here coming up to Webster is existing. We weren't planning any changes there, but. I think-
Okay, all right, that's by the hotel AC, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that is kind of, it's narrower. It's 8-foot travel or 8-foot parking lane next to a 5-foot bike lane. But,
Okay.
Let's see the next. So this is like the narrow spot here. This is inbound, just coming beyond Blair, between Blair and Franklin. So we've got a 7-foot parking lane next to a 5-foot bike lane and a 10-foot travel lane. So this is kind of our bare minimum. But I guess the thought here is that with the business at the corner and the residents, that if we can fit parking in here, we probably should. And with the bump out, it's kind of it's going to be a dead space anyway.
Okay, I mean, that's pretty close. That's really door zone territory there. So that is, that's a concern for people coming up, and they're going to be moving pretty slow going uphill. So, I'm just worried that the drivers won't see them coming.
Yeah, we've got some locations that have these widths. I think the argument for parking is that there aren't many spots, so it's a fairly short distance. And yeah, bicyclists are going to be moving slower since they're going up the hill. And there's not a huge turnover of parking here.
That was my question. What's the business on the corner?
That is Chalmers Jewelers.
Oh, okay.
They do have a little lot in the back off of Blair Street, but
and the rest of it's all residential.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, as I said, if it's low turnover, then it might be okay. But with a high turnover area, I'd be really worried about that.
Yeah, these are actually 2-hour spots, I believe. They were previously metered, but they're not anymore.
All right. Well, that's my feedback. But anyway, I'll take my hand down.
Just a concern I know you're taking it into account, Tom, but that is pretty narrow there, as you pointed out. Bridget, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So yeah, Tom, can we just go back to that same block? I just had a couple questions. So that sort of transitional housing complex that's there that takes up a good part of that block. I guess what I've experienced a lot there is folks getting dropped off and picked up right out front, which is a fair amount of turnover with parking there. And I'm just wondering, so the bus lane, it starts at 18. Just visually, it looks like it narrows down near the top.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
So there probably wouldn't be any options for.
Yeah, this bus lane line here is kind of set because of on the opposite side of Blair Street, there's kind of a shift. So yeah, there's really, with these lane lines and lane widths, there is not much wiggle room at all. Yeah, the bus. So the way this kind of works is that the bus lane line is kind of set in stone. That was approved with BRT, and those are kind of the minimums for the bus to fit with the stations. And then we're not moving the curb, so we're kind of working between the bus lane line and the curb.
Well, so the median that's there, that's not an option either? Because that's a pretty big median through there.
Yeah, this median will be the BRT stations.
Okay.
I I think they're kind of taking up the entire median.
They are, okay. All right. Then can you go up to, what would it be, Butler? So I'm just wondering, this is a particularly difficult crossing here, especially on the south side of Butler. It's just to get across there as a pedestrian is really difficult. And when that the nose of the median is kind of tight like that, it doesn't give folks necessarily kind of a refuge as they're going across. And I'm just wondering if there might be some options there to create, kind of a safe place for folks who can make it, because generally you can make it halfway. You can't really almost ever make it all the way. And actually it's the same thing at the bottom of the hill, right on that block that Chalmers is on. Especially because of the grade of that hill, both, going up and going down. And you kind of have that same situation there as well.
So yeah, this is all getting reworked with BRT, but with this, so this is like strictly a resurfacing project. So there was no plans to change anything concrete wise.
Okay.
But that's something we could keep in mind and see if there's something we could do there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know we're trying to cut down on the number of accidents through here and crashes, but it's still scary when you're a pedestrian. And it doesn't look like there's anything going on here that's going to make it any easier, especially for someone who's going to be, not able to cross quickly.
Jim has his hand up. Do you have something to add, Jim?
Yeah, I was just going to say with the resurfacing project, we could take a look at extending those noses. That would be a nice pedestrian improvement. That's a good suggestion. And we just have to kind of take a look at, since this is primarily just asphalt work, maybe a couple of curb and gutter replacements, making sure we're not getting into like additional poles and other underground infrastructure and things, but we can certainly look at doing what we can.
That'd be great. The other thing, and I know it's probably outside of the scope of this, but I just want to mention is for those same crossings that I mentioned, the distance is so great, and for whatever reason, the noise through there can be really pretty intense, and so it can be hard to hear some of the crossing signals. So I don't know, if that could be taken into consideration as well for folks who really rely on those. I don't know, especially if there are vehicles coming one way that can't see the crossing signals that are closest to them, but have to look at the ones that are far away. I don't know if there are ever options for like larger signals, but I've seen them in some big cities, and this is just such a busy and loud corridor that, anything we could do, I think would be appreciated and would be useful and would help cut down on the number of issues that we have with pedestrians in the corridor here.
Yeah, we'll have to think about that because, so with this area, we've got next year is going to be a kind of a continuation of that Blair Street project, which includes kind of the Blair East Wash intersection. And then we've got the reworking with the BRT. And then we have this project, which was planned to be resurfacing. So we'll see if we can fit some of those changes in somewhere, because I think the stuff down here, it's definitely going to be torn up for a big chunk of next year.
Okay. And then you said that you won't color the bus lanes yet. So those will just be used as regular motor vehicle lanes until then?
Yep. Basically. So with the BRT main contract, they will install the red pavement marking and signing probably right towards the end of the project when BRT is ready to go.
Okay. And then my last question, you had mentioned.
Bridget, hang on a second, Bridget. It looks like Jerry has his hand up, so he may have some feedback for one of your other questions. So is that right, Jerry?
Yeah, I can provide a little bit more information regarding the signals. So the signal at East Wash and Blair, because that's a BRT stop, it will have an accessible pedestrian signal.
Great.
So with those, we have the ability to adjust the volume. And then BRT would not be touching Webster and East Wash. We'd have to kind of scope that out to see if adding an accessible pedestrian signal there, what that would take. And then regarding the signal sizes, we use 12-inch signal heads, and that's the largest. Some cities use a 12-inch red and then 8-inch yellow and green. That's, I think, done in Canada a lot more often. But that's 12-inch is kind of the largest that is manufactured.
Okay, does that help, Bridget?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just one last question about.
No, go ahead.
The bus pullout, Tom, you had said, and I guess maybe I just haven't noticed it, the bus pullout at Jeff 1 there. Is that gone, you said?
Yep. So that was part of the BRT early works contract, which kind of involves removing the pullouts and the bump outs along East Wash in preparation for the bigger main work as part of BRT.
That'll be super helpful, I think. Thanks. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. You can ask as many questions as you want, Bridget. No problem. Other comments or questions? East Washington gets a lot of attention, Tom, so always good to hear about improvements on East Washington Avenue. Anybody have any other comments? A lot of good feedback for you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks to Jim and Jerry for their feedback as well. Okay, great. Did you have anything else, Tom, or is that good?
Nope, you're good, I'm good.
Okay, great. Let's move on to item 5, which is West Wilson Street. And who's doing that this evening?
I'll be doing this one.
Oh, hey, Jim.
This is a project that I'm still holding on to.
Okay.
I'll do a share screen. It's going to get a little weird for a sec, so sorry about that.
And congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So this first page here is just kind of a refresher. Hopefully you remember a little over 2 years ago, we have a project approved on West Wilson Street and South Broome Street. So on Broome Street from John Nolan Drive up, ultimately to West Main Street with some improvements. And on West Wilson Street, the reconstruction is from Broome Street to the Henry Hamilton intersection. And then kind of as part of this, we also had the corridor report on West Wilson Street that really went all the way from the intersection of Bassett down to the intersection with Blair. We also have a corridor plan on South Bassett Street that we've been implementing with some of our projects along Bassett Street, namely to install that parking protected bike lane. So as part of the Wilson Broome project, hopefully you remember we've got some cycle tracks along with widening the sidewalk to be kind of a shared use space along this block of Broome between John Nolan and Wilson. It's kind of zoomed way out. But so a path along South Broome Street, there'd be a shared use between Wilson and John Nolan, and then a separate bike facility between Doty and Wilson. And then this becomes kind of an on-street bike facility to connect into the bike boulevard on West Main Street. And then along Wilson Street, we also add a cycle track kind of coming around the corner up to the intersection of Henry and Hamilton. And then as part of that corridor plan was going to continue as a two-way bike facility on Wilson Street up to Blair. So that's all things that are still part of the plan. It's in the reconstruction project for 2023. But the reason I'm here tonight is we did add some additional money to this project to work on building out some more pieces of these corridor plans. So first off, I will go to the Wilson Bassett. I'm going to be kind of panning around on this plan, but big picture. So here's that main reconstruction intersection of Wilson and Broome Street, kind of on the right side of the page. And the left side of the page is where we've left off with the parking protected bike lane on South Bassett Street at West Main Street. So,
Jim, can you make your screen full?
Oh, sure.
Screen makes it a little easier to read. Thank you.
Yeah, let's see, full screen. There we go. So zoomed in. So this would be essentially with markings and those delineators or bollards, we would be setting up the remainder of the South Bassett corridor plan, which starting at West Main Street, this left side, because South Bassett's one way kind of heading to the south, I'll call it. This lane would drop at West Main Street. So vehicles would either have to turn left onto Main Street or merge over, similar to some other locations we have in the city, where that lane ultimately will become a parking lane on that side of the street. It wouldn't be a marked parking lane. It would be parking could be allowed here. And then we'd have just a single travel lane from West Main Street continuing up to the intersection with Broome. And then we'd continue the parking protected bike lane along South Bassett Street, continuing to the intersection of Bassett and Wilson. And also this would involve relocating the existing bus stop, which is near side at Bassett and Doty right now, to far side at Bassett and Doty, and constructing another floating bus stop here, which is that bus boarding island, and the parking protected bike lane would continue kind of along the curbside in between the boarding island and the curb. And then as we get to the intersection of Wilson and Bassett, this will get reconfigured a little bit. This is mostly consistent with that approved corridor plan on Wilson Street, with some slight modifications that we've been looking into a little bit. So currently, the vast majority of traffic kind of continues around this curve on Bassett Street towards Broome Street. There is kind of a right turn lane or continuation of a through lane on South Bassett Street. So this kind of going off screen, South Bassett Street dead ends on this next block. But vehicles could also turn onto the 500 block of West Wilson. So what we're showing here would be continuing the protected bike lane all the way up to this intersection, reconfiguring this intersection so vehicles that want to head towards Broome Street off of the 500 block of West Wilson would stop here, and where they currently kind of continue through and have a yield into almost their own lane on Wilson Street, they now have to stop, merge into this lane kind of into the center, creating more of a traditional T intersection here, and then have to turn onto Bassett Street. So this bike lane would continue down Bassett, would get to this always stop essentially at the new intersection of Wilson and Bassett. And then a bicyclist that's in that lane could either continue up what I haven't talked about yet, which would be a continuation of this side path on the 400 block of Wilson Street. Or we do have plans off of the dead end of South Bassett to one day extend. There is a kind of a pedestrian crossing of the railroad tracks down there, but to extend that through what is currently a piece of Brittingham Park up to North Shore Drive and be kind of part of the path network that ultimately connects to the Southwest Trail and to the Cap City Trail up at the intersection of North Shore and John Nolan. So the difference here from the original corridor plan is we are originally showing merging traffic that was turning right onto Wilson Street or continuing down to the dead end of Bassett across the bike lane. And the bike lane was going to continue around this curve and merge into a marked bike lane cycle track on West Wilson Street. So one of the drivers here is kind of recognizing that instead of having this conflict point with moving vehicles and this merge point, we could continue to this always stop, and also knowing that people may want to and will likely want to at some point in the future when we make that connection continue down Bassett Street too. And that Wilson Street isn't going to be the only bike facility in the area. And then the other change that we're proposing with this project now is actually moving the curb out on the 400 block of West Wilson Street and making this a sidewalk level off street cycle track side path, similar to what we're doing on the 300 block of Wilson Street as well. So the original plan was just marking out a buffer on the street using those delineators and bollards and keeping this on street. And then we're going to bring it off street at this intersection just because we were reconfiguring and we wanted to make sure that vehicles weren't going to be tempted to kind of continue up that street kind of yield lane right now. So the big changes here, side path, moving the curb out. This also works out better for some of the maintenance responsibilities that we have out here. One issue we're having with the parking protected bike lane on Bassett is garbage carts, that the carts have to be placed in that buffer space. By doing these side paths, that creates kind of more traditional terrace where people recognize and know I got to put my cart to the curb, and then it creates a little bit more space too than what we have in the buffer on Bassett Street as well. So I think I've said everything about this piece of it. But then this side path will continue up to the approved design for the Broome and Wilson intersection with the raised crossing here coming into the channelized right turn lane. The single lane coming up Wilson Street will become 2 lanes near the intersection just because it's a smaller movement. Certainly this what's currently a pretty wide lane is getting narrowed up a bit, be a through and left instead of, it's almost a separate through and a separate left lane right now. And then this right turn lane onto Broome Street. So I will go to the next page, is on the other end of the project. I'll start at the intersection of Wilson and Hamilton. We also have an ongoing watershed study in this area, just because there's some ongoing flooding issues and we're trying to address those as part of this project too. And as part of that watershed study, one of the recommendations was actually building a raised bike pedestrian crossing across this Henry Hamilton intersection. So we've got all this water screaming down Hamilton Street by the courthouse that we're trying to divert it back towards Broome Street. And we're going to have some upsized pipes along Wilson and Broome to collect that water. So this was kind of a win-win here. We can build a better bike pedestrian crossing of this. It's a pretty long crossing too, a little bit confusing. One thing I'm not showing here as part of this development project, we are reconfiguring Henry Street a little bit where it tees in here. Since that is being done separate from this project, I wasn't showing this on this plan, unfortunately. So we'd have this raised crossing. And with the original plan for Wilson Street, we're going to stage cyclists at the signal here, kind of coming off of the cycle track until we could build the rest of the improvements up Wilson Street. However, with doing the raised crossing now as part of this project, we kind of left any bicyclists heading inbound in kind of a weird limbo spot that we weren't really setting up well to go up Henry Street. And I'm sure people do it, but I definitely don't. I'm not biking up this Hamilton Street hill by the courthouse, both in terms of traffic speeds and volumes, and it's a pretty steep hill. So the other addition to this project was building out the recommendations of the corridor plan up to Carroll Street, that we're able to do that fairly easily and tying back into kind of the rest of Wilson Street until the rest of that project can be completed in 2024. So this included, some of these divider islands right at the intersection here to give a little bit more protection for the cycle track, and then marking out the buffers, installing the delineators. The only area where any parking or loading would be allowed on that south side of the street would be kind of in front of Pisons. I think you're all probably aware that there's some ongoing discussions about development in this area. So we'll see what that ultimately looks like by what's actually proposed with that building. But everywhere else where there was parking stalls, it was like one stall in between driveways. And with these cycle tracks kind of being parking protected, we do want to have a little bit more visibility and keep those parked vehicles away from driveways a little bit further. So that didn't really leave any additional space for parking stalls on that side of the street. So we'd mark out the buffer and we'd kind of keep the delineators a little bit closer to traffic, just because this is a little bit narrow for a two-way bike facility. So for simplicity, we'd probably mark out a straight line, but we'd have a little bit more space for two bicyclists passing each other or something like that in these areas. And on this particular block, we actually have a touch less space than what's been built out elsewhere on Wilson Street, primarily because we had kept the existing curb and gutter on this block that was in good shape, and there were also some larger trees. So to account for that, what we're showing, hopefully you remember how this is going to function on Wilson Street long term, that during off-peak times, we'd have parking loading adjacent to the cycle track where it can fit. And then we'd have a single travel lane on Wilson Street, and then we'd still have metered parking or loading on that northerly side of the street during off-peak times. During peak times, that parking is restricted, and that will become a peak hour travel lane, kind of like we have on several other city streets. On this particular block, though, we were a little pinched for space. So where in most instances, this would be a 10-foot kind of flex parking travel lane up against the gutter with a 2-foot buffer between the parking and loading. What we're showing here, because the constrained space, is squeezing this to a 9.5-foot travel lane that's got a 2-foot gutter on the other side of it, and then squeezing another 1.5 foot, or squeezing this buffer down to 1.5 feet between the parking and loading and the cycle track. One opportunity that we could look at, depending upon what the redevelopment proposals are, is maybe we can find a way to get a little bit of additional width if there is going to be parking or loading in this area, to get a better buffer in between the cycle track and that parking space. And then getting up to Carroll Street to continue the cycle track through, this bump out on the side of the street gets removed. We build the curb through, but with how some of the lane transitions are working out, we can do a little bit of curb work on the other side of the street, but keep these bump outs on that side, which will be helpful for keeping these pedestrian crossings a little bit shorter. But I also think they're necessary to keep ADA compliant curb ramps here too, just with the grades coming down Carroll Street. It gets a little awkward, but on an interim basis, we would kind of end the cycle track here at Carroll Street. We'd maybe give a little bit of additional space beyond the crosswalk for a bike to stage here if they wanted to cross and go up Carroll Street. And then this would continue being parking by the DOA building in an interim basis. Timing wise, this pavement marking and curb work would probably happen in the later part of the Wilson Broom project. So we're looking fall 2023. And then we'd be starting up work on the remainder of East Wilson Street in spring of 2024. So this is going to be kind of a pretty short-lived interim bike facility that kind of ends abruptly here at Carroll Street. This seemed better than ending it at Hamilton, though, with a little bit of a clear direction of where you can go. The other piece of this is to really continue this up to MLK. We had explored that because ideally we could get it up to MLK on an interim basis. Just grades work out better there. It's a more obvious termination point for connections to the Capitol. But we really have to reconstruct that whole intersection to make that work with some of the lane transitions and grades. So we felt as though that was a better fit as part of that 24 project on East Wilson Street. So I think, thank you all for bearing with me on my kind of long-winded explanation of how we ended up here. But I think that's all I have to present. I'll keep this up with my screen share just so we can float around to some of these spots if there are any questions.
Sure, that was a lot you covered. So I bet there might be questions. Bridget, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. Let's see. So Jim, I guess I'll start where your screen is right now. So I'm still kind of concerned about that, the two-way cycle track through there and the incredibly constrained situation and the fact that folks will be going, some folks will be going uphill in the speed differential. But aside from that, so with the Pisons redevelopment there, just knowing what's been going on like all summer, including weekends, on the construction that's taking place right at the corner there with is it Morton that's doing the building there? and how that has incredibly negatively affected the bikeability and pedestrian friendliness of that area. I'm just concerned that, the reconstruction at the Paisans building is going to impact, particularly if there are like bollards placed in there, anything, that it's just going to obliterate it, frankly.
Yeah.
So
we, Tom Moore and I have been talking about some options here. We don't know what their street occupancy is going to look for that project yet. There's still a lot of unknowns. And while we've been communicating and making it obvious for any of the development proposals along here that, this is going to be a modification to the street configuration, we do have some concepts to, if there is a conflict with the occupancy or something like that, that this isn't going to work out. We felt as though this may still be a good option, that we could restrict parking along the courthouse and maybe reduce this during construction to just a single travel lane on West Wilson Street and do kind of a temporary facility out in the street. That we really did not want to leave people kind of hanging at this intersection. Timing wise, this is probably going to work out reasonably well with the ongoing building work here. But there will be some other potential conflicts going up Wilson Street.
Yeah, I really like the raised crossing there. I think that's going to be super helpful. And I actually think that going down to, for most of the time, one travel lane coming off of West Wilson there, I think that's going to be helpful, because I can't imagine everybody doesn't know how much confusion there is there. Just constant. And so really forcing everyone into one lane, I think will minimize that. So I think I'm optimistic there. Can you head west, please?
Absolutely. Apologies for the quick zoom out. There we go.
Awesome. Okay, actually right there. So right where your little cursor hand is. So that crossing, I've always had a feeling about it, and I've been watching it lately really closely. So there's slightly weird geometry on that radius of that turn. And so it looks like right now you have the crossing right where it is now. And it is very difficult for pedestrians to be seen there. And so, often cars are going pretty fast anyway, but even, when they do, I can see people, they sort of tap their brakes after they've made it through and past the pedestrians who are waiting, particularly on the north side there. I am wondering, is it possible to move that crossing further west for better visibility to oncoming traffic on South Bassett?
So I think we run out of space on this island. And then with the storm sewer here, we don't have a spot to put a ramp along with the tree conflict. So it's kind of like all of our good options, we ran into other conflicts here too. And we didn't want to move it east because that just makes the visibility problem worse.
Yeah. Okay.
We can, I'll take a look and see if we can squeeze it in like in between these two inlets.
I think even that would be a lot better.
And I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt to try.
Okay. And then last thing, can you keep going further west north there? So that that little bus stop curb there that's going to be right near Doty, the intersection of Doty. Do you know, is the geometry of that going to be similar to the one that's closer, that's right off of West Wash, the new one there?
Similar, yes.
Okay.
But with a little bit of better options here. One thing I should also mention, I think we are also planning to allow parking along here too, which hopefully will prevent vehicles from trying to pass a bus and then merge back into the single through lane here in front of the bus. But because we aren't trying to squeeze two travel lanes here, we'll have a little bit more space to work with on this boarding island. And grades wise, it is not nearly as complicated. We don't have the driveway immediately here. We don't have, there's actually a pretty good amount of Bassett Street that's draining towards West Wash in that area. That we had some concerns about creating flooding problems there too, that we had to kind of factor in and lay things out in a less ideal fashion. So if there are particular things that you have in mind about that bus boarding island that you wanted to point out,
honestly, the only thing I would say that the island as you come off of East Wash, the geometry of it is like, to me, it's perfect. It's the smoothest right turn. And the way it's placed is every time I use it, I just like thank whoever made it, because it's a pleasure. It's a little bit more difficult if I'm biking, but when I'm driving, it's great. So that geometry for coming off of West Wash is great. And if you can transition it like that, I think that whatever it is about that radius of the median there, it's just great. So
excellent. Well, thanks. Because we're also going to have another one with this project on Broome Street by Doty too. So to know.
Okay. Yeah, actually. Okay. Yep.
So
That's it. Thanks.
That Bassett and West Wash was my first crack at a bus boarding island, a floating bus stop. So I'm glad it turned out pretty decent. Thanks.
Good. All right. Is that all you had then, Bridget? Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I wanted to look at that the Bassett and Wilson intersection that you're at right here. So I think from the sound, I don't remember the old bike lane configuration, but it sounds like this is much better. I'm just wondering about that, where the bike lane and the traffic come to that stop there, next to each other. Yeah, right in there. So I'm imagining that a lot of drivers are going to be going straight or right, and a lot of cyclists are probably going to be turning left. So it's a minor issue, but I'm wondering if there are any ways to like get a turn lane for the cyclists or something. I know like at a signal, we would do like a bike box or something. I don't know if you can have different stop lines, like put different stop lines for the bikes as opposed to the traffic, or anything like that that would smooth that sort of weaving thing a little bit. I think the fact that they're stopped makes this much better, but just something I'm wondering about.
We'll think about that. We'll see what we can do. That's a good suggestion. It is kind of a unique scenario, so I'll make a note of that.
Yeah.
We'll brainstorm and see what we can come up with.
Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, looks great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, other comment. A lot of things going on here. Darren, go ahead.
Thanks, Jim. That same intersection there, I just was wondering after Bridget's comments about the pedestrians crossing and moving that walking. Is there even a way of just alerting drivers on South Bassett that's there, whether through pavement markings of PED or something, just to give them a heads up to be alert through there?
Sure, we can take a look at that. Maybe I'm showing kind of a standard crosswalk. Maybe we could do a continental here for a little bit better visibility, and we can see we have a sign showing up here. I'm not sure what that sign is, if it's an advanced warning peg crossing sign, but we could take a look at doing something like that too. And I do think reducing this down to a single lane and kind of tightening this up should hopefully help slow things down a little bit and make it less treacherous for crossing. At least be able to cross a little bit quicker, but we can certainly take a look at improving the warning and visibility of that too.
Great.
Okay. Anybody else have any other comments or questions for Jim? Okay, I'm seeing no hands. A lot of good changes there, Jim. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So next we're moving on to item 6, which is Milwaukee Street. Who's doing that this evening?
I'll be doing that.
Is that Sean?
Sean with traffic engineering. Yep.
Sure. Go ahead, Sean.
All right. Hopefully you're seeing my PDF. It's like this.
Yeah, if you could do the full screen like Robbie asked earlier, that would be helpful.
Full screen mode. Yes. Okay. So this is a project that I brought earlier this year. This is an extension of Milwaukee Street that is brought on by the development of these lots, the alley loaded lots. And the project limits are from Windstone to Juneberry. It's just an extension of Milwaukee Street. Previously, we had some kind of, I guess, interesting geometry. We're only building half the street, and we were having the traffic move over, and we're only building the south side. We talked with the development team a little bit. They actually own the property on both sides of the street, so we came back with a new revision, which I think is good for everyone, that builds Milwaukee Street on both sides, because they own both sides. They're just going to do it all now, and we decided that we're going to build the outside curb and have a larger median, because we don't need 2 lanes on Milwaukee Street at this time. So we're going to keep it 1 lane each direction at this point. So we're kind of transitioning on that. This looks a little wacky, but that's kind of how we got to transition from 1 lane to 2 to where there's 2 lanes and a left turn. So it's a kind of interesting transition, but that's kind of what we have to do. So I guess this is the first half. This is from Windstone, Golden Maple. We're continuing to have bump outs, which is we've been kind of doing up and down Milwaukee streets. As you can see, the median's pretty wide, 40 feet. It's pretty huge. This intersection, we're proposing to make that only right in, right out. We didn't think with the neighborhood that every access point on Milwaukee Street needed to be full access, especially if an interchange happens someday. I saw that as a potentially problematic down the road. And then this next page is, as we're moving east from Golden Maple to Juneberry, it's kind of a similar setup. This is kind of more of a major Town Center Road. It kind of loops around and then eventually connects with Sprecher. So we want to do full access there. I guess the idea with the 26-foot width is that we could have 11-foot travel lane. And that's next to the curb, so that's 1-foot gutter, 10-foot lane, 7-foot bike lane, which would allow us to do 2-foot buffer, 5-foot lane, depending on how we wanted to do that, and an 8-foot parking lane. So I think with that, we'll have options. When we paint it, kind of keeping it open-ended by having it at 26 feet. But it's definitely narrow enough where there should be lower speeds, should be pretty good traffic calming. And I think that's all I have. So if there's any questions, ask away.
Robbie, go ahead.
Thank you for explaining what the allocation of that 26 feet would be, because when you said it was 1 lane in each direction, I was thinking, why do we need 26 feet for 1 lane? What is the land use plan for this area, and do you really need parking? Because otherwise, it's just a gigantic road that people are not going to drive slowly on. So I'm just wondering what the land use is.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this map's probably the best one to go to. So on the south side, we're talking these alley loaded, these lots that are pretty narrow. These are the ones, from Meridian's perspective, they told us that they need parking the most. So that's what's going on the south side. On the north side, we're expecting a little more commercial employment uses. So uses I also think that would demand some parking when they get built out. This whole area is kind of meant to be a town center area, and I think it still is. It's just with the uncertainty of the interchange, it hasn't really taken off. So that was kind of the idea there.
What won't all of those uses, given how far out it is, probably have substantial off-street parking? I mean, the employment areas, the retail areas, probably going to have a lot of off-street parking. And I don't know, you said the lots on the south side are narrow, but I'm assuming you mean that they're single-family homes or multiple. I mean, are they townhomes? Are they apartments? What? Because usually they build like a lot of off-street parking, and then the on-street parking isn't used, and then people just see it as a gigantic wide road and they speed up, defeating the idea of having it be slow.
Yeah, I think they're intended to be single family, similar to what they have on the this Reston Heights on the south side of the alley. I think their plan was to have that be the same. You just kind of mirror that. I guess to go back to the the employment commercial, we're kind of, to me, a little bit in uncharted territory. I mean, I think you're right. That's traditionally what, there is a lot of surface parking, off-street parking. But with our traffic demand management, it's, a lot of that is changing, but also, a lot of that's based on parking, and, I guess a lot of that is up in the air, but, that's something we could look at. We could go back to, the developer and ask them if that's something that could be done. We could, eliminate that bump out and just maintain that curb all the way through. That certainly is a possibility. But I guess that they say they've said that they need it. So I guess that's why we're providing. I guess that's what we've had the rest of Milwaukee Street.
So, I mean, the other option would be to have parking on one side. You could even alternate which side it's on to create a chain effect. I mean, I'm just wondering about the need for 26 feet for a one-lane road. I mean, one lane in each direction, 26 feet on each side. So anyway, my concern is you're thinking that it's going to be a relatively slow speed street. I'm just concerned it won't be, because it's going to be super wide, because nobody's going to use that parking. So you can think about that, take it or leave it, go back to the developer and ask what they need. But that's just my comments, because that's what we've tended to see.
Other comments on that, Sean, in response?
No, I guess we can go back and talk with the developer, and I can talk with the engineer and see if there's any ability for us to do that, and we can update the exhibit as necessary before it goes to Public Works.
Okay. You took your hand down, so I assume that's all you have, Robbie?
Yep, I'm just giving my feedback. I mean, we're not passing this necessarily. So I'm just giving feedback for future consideration.
Yeah, we've heard that same feedback, and I've seen that on streets in my neighborhood too. When there's places for parking and nobody's parked there, the cars go really fast. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. The only other thing I was wondering is you talked about having the median go through where Golden Maple Road intersects. That seems fine to me. I'm just wondering if it wouldn't make sense to let bikes go through there. So think of it more as like a diverter than a solid median. Yeah, especially since I think you're talking about there's bike lanes in either direction here. So someone might want to make a left off of Golden Maple Road.
Yeah, we can look at doing something like that, or at least widening the sidewalk in between.
Yeah,
that's we can add that in. Accommodate that somehow.
Okay. Other comments or questions for Sean? Okay, thanks. I just want to reiterate what Robbie said, because I see it in my neighborhood all the time. Lots of streets, particularly the Moreland Road, where there's places for cars to park on both sides, and typically there's nobody parked there. It's a huge, wide open street, and cars just blast down the street because it looks really wide and open for them to drive. So, it's a theme that we've been seeing, but we also understand that development isn't finalized yet, Sean. So we understand that potential need. Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, to that point, it just looks like I was looking on the map view and the satellite view. Those houses look like they load up from the alley to a garage. So there's garage parking behind there, it looks like. So they have off-street parking with the facility.
Okay, so you're hearing a lot of feedback around that one point, Sean. Maybe go back and see what the developer has to say.
Yeah, I can do that.
Other comments or questions? Okay, thanks, Sean. Okay, next we have you want to take that down for us, Sean? Sean, could you stop screen sharing, please? Can somebody help Sean stop screen sharing? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Next, we have traffic signal priority list. Would that be Jerry?
Yeah, that'd be Jerry.
And Yang as well?
Yeah, it will be Jerry, but I just want to quickly maybe go over the process for everyone, since I think some members may not have gone through this process yet, and we also made some recent changes to it. So this is going to be a two-step process. So tonight, Jerry will talk about general requests this year and some general recommendations for further studies, and we'll bring the list back. Right now, we're looking at March to have a final approval from this body after Jerry, do more study. We have to do March because starting from April, we start to develop our capital budget request for the next year. Mm-hmm. And we're going to build in that, any pro signals in our request for the following year. So in the past, we try to do the approvals earlier in the year and try to build a signal in the same year as it got approved. Right now with the lead time, because of supply chain, it's not possible. Mm-hmm. And also we got a request from our finance colleagues that they don't want surprises of doing budget amendments if we do it the same year, because the budget was already approved the previous year. So this way we'll be able to build the project into our normal budget request. So trying to remove that level of uncertainty on our budget, for financing purpose. So just want to highlight some of the general process and the new process. So the signal will be proof release process this time. It's going to be built in 2024. So with that, I'll pass on to my colleague Jerry.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Jerry Shipper with the City of Madison Traffic Engineering Department. Yeah, as Yang said, this first meeting is to present the list of different requests we received from the public, from neighborhood associations, from alders, or from staff. So we've taken those requests. We've collected some preliminary traffic volume data and speed data. Entered that into our spreadsheets that analyze against the traffic signal warrants. Came up with a preliminary number for those requested, updated all the crash data for all of the intersections on the list, and then have as one of the attachments the preliminary or the working draft of the list. And I'm not going to go into all the attachments. I'm going to assume some of those were read. I'm just going to kind of go right into the intersections that were requested, which ones we are recommending to perform some more in-depth studies. Then we'll collect your feedback, see if you're okay with that list, or you have any additional ones you'd like to add. Then we'll do those studies, and then in March come back with the final list and our final recommendations. So I'm going to try and share this here real quick. All right. So everyone can see that, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so the three that we are recommending for the study are the American Parkway, Hepker Road, Ratman Road intersection, which is an all-way stop on the far northeast side of the city, bordering Sun Prairie. This is an intersection that's been brought up a few times in the past several years. And it's just been a few years since we've studied that, and there's been some more kind of development out in that area, both on the Madison side and the Sun Prairie side. So we thought it would be a good time to collect some more data, specifically the afternoon peak delay study and some turning movement observations. Then the next one is Cross Country Road, Maple Grove Road, and Nesbitt Road. This is also an all-way stop, and this is on the far southwest side of the city. This one, I believe Sean knows more about this, but we're also considering or investigating a roundabout for this. But since it was brought up during the as a request for a traffic signal, we thought it would be good to collect some data now, and then if we want to compare it with a roundabout, we'll have that data. So if we collect our peak hour turning movement counts, we should be good to kind of compare both a roundabout and a traffic signal. And then there's the next several down on the list, we're not recommending any further study, and that's Milwaukee Road and Sprecher Road. The reason for that one is because we have some recent studies, and the initial volumes that we collected this year are actually down from the 2019 volumes when it still didn't meet warrant. So kind of based on the volumes being higher in 2019 when it didn't meet warrant to lower volumes today, we didn't really feel like it was necessary to do any further study there. But given all the development and attention that this area is getting, I expect this to be back on the list in the next couple of years. North Franklin and East Johnson Street. We are not recommending any further study there. It just was pretty low on the list, and kind of given the nature of Johnson Street, I don't think that's really going to tell us anything, shed any further light on things. Hepker Road and Manufacturers Drive, I'm not recommending any studies, pretty far down on the list, but probably one that we're going to keep an eye on over the next few years. Then we have Monona Drive and Winnicor Road. Came in pretty far down on the list as well. So we're not recommending any further study. Northport Drive and Warner Park, similar thing, pretty far down on the list. No further study there. Siggelkow Road, Freedom Ring Road and Valley Drive, that's bordering with McFarland on the southeast side of the city. This one is new to the list, and just because we've not looked at this one before, we're recommending a afternoon delay study and turning movement observation. We have Packers and Schlimgen. This is another intersection that's been on the list a few times in the past. We have a recent study here, and since then, nothing really has changed. So we're not recommending further study. However, I believe there is, I don't know how far along it is, but there's some potential for development on that corner. And when that happens, we would take another look at this intersection, whether it's through that development or once it is open and operating, and we would do a further study. There's also one more intersection that was requested, but we didn't include it in here. That is Atwood in Ohio. And this was actually collected during the pre-construction notices going out to the neighborhood for the St. Paul project. And we didn't add it here because the nature was difficult to turn out of Ohio Street from the neighborhood, and the street configuration was changed so that Ohio Street's a one-way away from Atwood, so you can only turn off Atwood onto Ohio Street. So we felt that we would maybe give the project some time to finish up and let people kind of come up with a new travel pattern in the area before we go back out there and do any study. So that's what we're looking at here, is those three intersections for further study. I'll open it up for questions or comments, but that's what we're here to discuss.
Okay, comments or questions? Robbie, go ahead.
So there are two intersections that you're not currently suggesting further study that I think have sort of unique problems. One is the Warner Park driveway and Northport, and somewhere on Northport, I don't know where, but the driveway to Warner Park seems like as good a space as any. We need to have a way for pedestrians to cross over to Warner Park. We have a lot of housing on the north side of Northport, and we have a big park on the south side of Northport, and it's a half a mile between Troy Drive and Sherman. And that's a long way to go. And both of those are not pedestrian friendly crossings either. There's a lot of people that would like to get over to that park. And I just kind of want to put my 2 cents worth in that I think this is also an equity issue, because there's a lot of low income housing on the north side without a lot of green space, and they need to be able to get over to Warner Park. So wherever it is, I think we need a crossing there somehow.
I just asked Robbie, are you suggesting we do further study on that one then?
Well, I'm wondering about the number of pedestrian crossings. I mean, it's the problem with studying pedestrian crossings is that if it's really scary to cross, you're not going to get a lot of people trying to cross. And of course, the winter is probably not a great time to study people trying to get to Warner Park either. But I guess maybe just keep it in mind, maybe for future years, and really start to look at what can we do to make Northport Drive easier to cross. That's kind of the bottom line there. It's bad. It's bad for pedestrians. It's bad for bicyclists. And you've got housing on the north side and a lot of people that need to be able to get you into the park. So that's kind of the bottom line there. The other one is the Schlingen and Hackers. And there is a Montessori school there. And I've heard a lot of people complain. There is a pedestrian activated flashing light, which I have tried to use as a bicyclist, and it is terrifying. So there is a school over there, and I know there's a lot of parents who have come to us and said, I live across the street from the school that my kids go to, and I can't walk across the street with my kids. So again, if not this year, maybe in future years, especially if we do have some redevelopment, Hackers again needs a safe way to get across it. That is kind of where that comes in. And it's a long stretch between lights there, and people are moving really fast, and it's a wide road, and there's residential on one side, and there used to be a brew pub on the other side, but there is at least a Montessori school on the other side. And there's probably going to be new stuff coming in. So I think people should be able to get across that road. So thanks.
So Jerry and Yang, your thoughts with regard to the safe pedestrian crossings at those two spots?
Yeah, as Robbie said, that to do a pedestrian study is to go out there and count existing pedestrian crossings today, which puts us in winter. And if a road is particularly difficult to cross, that might deter people. So that is a big challenge when looking at the pedestrian warrant, and just the volume that you have to meet the pedestrian warrant. So a recent example of an intersection that I was kind of surprised we studied and did not meet the pedestrian warrant, and my other warrants was Henry and West Washington.
Wow.
Right downtown, and it didn't have enough pedestrian crossings to meet the pedestrian warrant, which was pretty shocking.
Yeah.
The other challenge here is this is a WSDOT connecting highway, so we would have to get approval from WSDOT. And at the moment, we have one request out at North Portland School that met traffic signal warrants, but we have to get approval from WSDOT. So we'll see what they say. I don't know how willing they would be to consider a traffic signal for potential head crossings. I think they're probably a little bit more by the books. But yeah, maybe what we hear back from Packers North Portland School might shed some light. We can study, but I guess that's what I'm saying is we can get a count. I don't know what that's going to say specifically, Robbie, to what your comment was.
Right. Yeah. I know that it's a WSDOT issue as well. I'm just throwing it out there because, if nobody can say that it wasn't brought up. Yeah. And I've had people complain to me about both of those locations. And, I don't know what to say, but it's an issue in both locations, and just consider it brought up, and that we can think about what we might be able to do on these major arterials where we have residential on one side and attractions on the other. So,
Yang, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Anne. Yeah, Robbie is definitely correct. For both locations, that both locations are very difficult for pedestrians to cross, and the bicyclists as well. Without help. So it's definitely our radar. We actually didn't hear much complaints from folks on the Northport and the Water Park Drive one, but we heard tons of complaints from residents nearby on the Shimigan Northport one. Jerry is correct that sorry for the notifications coming from emails. Jerry is correct that either location, it's likely that if we do a study right now, it's likely not meeting the warrant. But we got to keep this on our radar. We have also been working, as part of for example, NECTO, working with other cities, working together, trying to see whether we can change the MUTCD. One of the things that we feel like it does not make sense is the number of pedestrians required to meet the signal warrants, which is unreasonably high, to either meet the warrants. So hopefully, we'll see some changes on that as well, and make it a lot easier for us to justify signalization requests, and work with we start get those approved. So thank you.
Okay, great. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. I fully expect that in the not too distant future, the MUTCD will be revised and will be issued. And I really think that the pedestrian warrants is one of those areas that's going to be changed, because I think there was lots of comments. And I guess as a suggestion, the thought is when that happens, that we should be prepared to do a list of places that we think that should be studied at that time. And I agree with what's been said as far as the timing to do these studies, not the winter time. So maybe we kind of take a look at those, and let's say the manual comes out and gets revised this spring of 23 sometime, let's say. And if that happens, that we try to do those, get those list of places we think that we want to study and collect those numbers and take a look at those in the summertime. And that would make a lot of sense. So we don't necessarily have to wait until next year to do those places where we think that we have concerns about pedestrians.
Mm-hmm.
Yang, what do you think as far as that is concerned? That maybe is just kind of recognizing that now is not a good time to do the study, but identify places citywide where we want to take a look at that when it's available, that then we have the ammunition to address those, and that we can do the studies and get those a head start on whether it's 24 or whenever. But anyway, that's my thought.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yeah, I agree in that we should not collect pedestrian counts in the winter, but rather look into some other time to do it. So I think we're going to make some adjustments on when we do this process. Right now, we're trying to make adjustments. So I think ideally we will maybe, instead of do this process at this time of year, maybe we'll adjust, and maybe next round we will see whether we can arrange it for like a few months earlier, so that after we get a feedback from this commission, we can still go out to collect pedestrian counts. So I'm not sure whether the summer would work out for us, but at least maybe maybe fall. So we'll tweak the kind of project cycle to see whether we can make that happen. For example, next time we bring you here, or maybe after 2 cycles, as we kind of catch up on things. So yeah, I do think that's a wonderful point. And we'll make a load on these 2 intersections, right? So in the future, we can when we go out to do pedestrian counts, we'll make sure that we consider these locations. And when we I agree with Bill that I think MTC got to change relatively soon. There are some efforts pushing really hard on that. and they might even have an interim date for release of a new version. So when that happens, we'll pay close attention, and we'll look at the probably do some additional study to see some locations can meet the signal burdens at that time.
Okay, great. Did you have anything else, Bill?
Yeah, I did. As far as, one thing we've talked about tonight as far as pedestrians is ped counts, but there may be other factors that we should make sure that we recognize and have that information in our back pocket, whether it's schools or parks or whatever, and distance to other signals, whatever, things that help make the case for where the pedestrian has been got the short stick here in the past, that maybe we can improve the opportunity to get some pedestrian relief in those areas that we have not necessarily, just based on pure numbers of crossings, because it's like if it's not safe or not comfortable to cross, they're not crossing, and therefore you don't have the numbers. So you're caught between the hard and the rock, chicken and the crossing, trying to get more information. Anyway, that's my input. I think we want to take a look at this when we can. Thanks.
Yeah, other comments or questions? I just want to follow up on that flaw that everybody's been talking about, and that is, if it's not safe to cross, people are afraid to cross, but yet you're going to count how many people cross there. That that just doesn't seem right, because if it's unsafe, and people aren't crossing because it's unsafe, then those counts are going to, obviously be way understated. As Robbie pointed out, there may be a whole bunch of people who want to cross there who just don't because they're afraid to. So, how do you address that?
Yeah, build it and they will come.
Yeah, but but if it doesn't meet the warrant because they won't come,
I think we have to identify those other factors of why there's a need for, as far as what kind of facilities are in the area and how far it is to other places where people can cross. But things, schools and parks and so forth, that I think we need, at least as far as our needs, as far as recognizing where those things are needed.
Well, it sounds like Safe Streets Madison evaluation. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good discussion. Maybe we can think about whether we can be more creative. For a few times, we did instead of looking at the current condition, the current counts, right? We did projections a few times, right? Looking to in the future, as we know that if there are developments coming, instead of look at condition now, we anticipate maybe when that development is done, what a condition may look like. I don't believe we have done that for pedestrian signal warrants, but something maybe we can consider. We'll also check whether anyone else in other places in the country has done that. For example, just consider for example, if we provide a signal, look at surrounding 90 use to see what might be the actual demand out there if the facility is decent enough. So I think Jerry has some thoughts as well. Jerry,
go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, and to kind of further that point too, I believe this is the first year the ITE trip generation manual has included non-vehicle trips. So I think some of the land uses have pretty few data points, but it's kind of a sign of a start of doing that, where you can look at a future development, and before you would look at the graph and say, okay, it's going to have this many vehicle trips, but now there's at least an effort being put into how many transit trips, how many pedestrian or bike trips might this generate, and where is it? Is it along a high frequency transit line, or is it kind of off out in the countryside? So I've looked through those and some of them only have like 1 or 2 data points, but some have a little bit more. It's kind of a sign of things to come. It's kind of exciting.
Okay, great. Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder, is there an opportunity to do a pilot study? Again, we can't get the numbers because people aren't there. You know, can we just say we're studying this for 6 months and you put up temporary markings and temporary signalized crossings, and you study it and see, and maybe you find out that people still aren't crossing there, well then we're never, then we don't worry about it. But if we are, then we can push harder. I should hope there's some way to couch it as a pilot. They certainly do that on other things, bike lanes and everything else. So when it comes to decentering the automobile and uplifting the pedestrian, I think that's something we should consider.
Yang, Jerry, thoughts about that? How we might do a pilot?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think for signals, it's relatively expensive to set up a temporary signal. So I think that might be one obstacle. But we can definitely keep this in mind. Think about it, especially if we happen to reconstruct this street. Right, if opportunity comes, we can play with some temporary signals and to see how the actual demand will look like. Yeah, I think it's the bike lanes, temporary bike lanes are a little bit more easier to set up than the traffic signal. Traffic signals like permanent ones typically cost somewhere from $200,000 to $500,000, and temporary one probably costs at least for a reasonable test probably costs at least $50,000. So I think the kind of the barrier is there, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't look into it.
Yeah, thanks. I just had seen that. I was down in Miami for the Revolution conference, and Miami's got them all over the streets for all their construction. There's temporary signals that have popped up all over downtown Miami.
Okay. All right. Well, a lot of good ideas. So right now what we have on the table is for this year, to do additional studies on the 3 that staff has recommended. Additional thoughts or questions? If not, I need a motion. Bill?
I'll make a motion that the 3 proposals from the staff be the studied for potential installation.
Okay.
For this year. Thank you.
Darren, is that a second?
It is. I second it.
Okay. Bill, did you wish to speak to your motion? We can't hear you, Bill.
Yeah, I'm trying to get myself unmuted. So yeah, I think what they've done already, the work is great, and I don't have any qualms about or any disputes about or any other suggestions that should be studied, and they've looked at what it is. So I think for where we're at right now, I think that's a good proposal to study those.
Okay, additional discussion. We've given everybody a lot to think about and for future years and how we may proceed with some of these other things. So we'll certainly keep that in mind. Okay, see no hands for additional discussion. I'm going to assume unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to object. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, thanks, Jerry and Yang. A lot of good discussion again, and we'll look forward to hearing about it some more in March when you come back. Okay, next we have item 8, which is the annual traffic crash report and follow-up from the previous year. Is that going to be you, Yang, and Tom? Are you working on that as well, or?
That'll be Tom.
Okay, yep. Tom, you're going to take that. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Mark Winter is retiring soon.
So he is. Okay.
From Mark to Winter, so it's Tom's first year.
Okay,
I think he will do a good job, but I'm here to help.
Okay, and give our best to Mark and to tell him thanks for all his years of service.
Thank you. what do?
Yeah, Mark did the majority of the work on this, so he spent a lot of time on this, and he has been for quite a few years. I was just looking back at it, our folder. So we've got crash data starting from 1950, and it looks like we started our kind of a formal crash report in 1970. So it's kind of interesting looking at those really old ones. But so we've been doing this pretty much every year since 1970, and kind of recently changed the name from crash report to crash facts report. So this is like a two-part thing where I'm going to just give you a brief overview of this 2021 crash facts. So it's not this year, but the previous year, because it takes time to get all that data and pin it and analyze it. And then the second part is showing the review of the 2020 crashes. So the idea is to show, like, this is our data that we just got, and then after we look at it and review it, we'll come back with some ideas. So for the 2021 crash facts, we had about 3,000 crashes, and it was among about 900 intersections. And going way back, this was just like a basic crash facts. These are the highest crash intersections, and these are where the fatalities were in high injury. But we're focusing more on injuries now with high injury network and Safe Streets and Vision Zero. So this is kind of just a piece of that now, where in the past it was really the main, kind of the only thing that we presented as far as crashes. And when we say crashes, we're talking about reportable crashes only. So those are the crashes that are either an injury, $1,000 in damage, or $200 in government damage, like hitting a sign or a street light or something like that. And the report summarizes all the different types of crashes. So it's there's a lot of data in it. I can't go through the whole thing. So I think this is more kind of give you the report, and you could really take a lot of time looking through it and analyzing it. And if you have questions, bring those to me, or if it's something else that you want to see. Sometimes some of this stuff is easier to look at where you can sort it in an Excel sheet, but we're just kind of presenting the PDF form. So in 2019, we made the change of including crashes within 250 feet of an intersection rather than just within kind of the crosswalks of an intersection. So comparing data from now to pre-2018 and further back, it's kind of not an apples to apples comparison, but we do include our 5-year average crashes. So you got to think about that when you're looking at the 5-year, because that includes a couple of years where we weren't including 250 feet back. And when you start on these big intersections, when you include 250 feet back, you're catching a lot of the rear end crashes that we previously would not have counted for that intersection. And then one of the other newer things that we've added is the EPDO value, which is equivalent property damage only. So if you take a crash as a property damage only crash and you count that as one crash, and then you take a crash that's a high injury crash, you count that as more than one crash. So that would be, I think, one of the numbers we're doing, that would be counted as, I had the number here, but I think it was around 4. And then fatalities are a much higher equivalent. And those numbers change a little bit just based on annual numbers that are put out each year based on a lot of different things and inflation and cost of crashes. But anyway, that's the EPDO is probably a better indicator of crash severity at an intersection. There's also crash frequency, but crash frequency tends to really skew based off of low volume streets. So crash frequency is usually like the number of crashes per million vehicles entering the intersection, and that's really not an indicator that's used. We do have that in there, but we're more looking at the EPDO. So we do post this on the city webpage. So this will be posted under our reports and studies following tonight. This is just the overview map. So it's kind of like the high injury network, but this is showing all the crashes. So that was just like a broad, there's a lot of data in the crash facts report. If you had any questions or comments about that, we could go through that now. But we've got some of the trends, 5-year trends in the different types of crashes. We've got some pins in here, diagrams of the higher crash intersections.
Robbie, go ahead with your question.
So this is sort of a process question. Do you count self-reported crashes in this? Or only ones where the police wrote the report?
I'm not sure if when you I think it just, as long as it meets the requirements. So I don't think that the police have to write the report. As if it meets the reportable crash requirements, it's included in this.
That's the state definition for a report that has to be written up on a MV 4000, I think it's called. And the police are supposed to fill that out themselves. But just in the last 10 days, I've had 2 people complain to me that the police refused to come out to a crash site where a bicyclist was hit. And, I said, were you injured? And they said, well, I was like scraped up. And I said, that is a reportable injury and the police are supposed to write it up. And they said, well, the police refused to come out and they said to just do a self-report. But it's not worth it for me. If they're not going to come out and record it, then why should I bother to fill it out? Because they're not going to do anything. I mean, in one case, the guy said, I want the guy ticketed for failure to yield. But the other one was actually a fairly serious crash in the report, and the police refused to come out.
Well, I think you can self-report, can't you, Tom?
That's why I wanted to know if those were included in the crash report.
Yang, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe you can self-report, but this probably didn't end up in the state's database. I believe what state has are the reports from all different law enforcement agencies. So which it does involve a formal MV 4000 from a law enforcement agency. So that's my
you're using the state crash database.
That is correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So the self-report are not included is the answer to that.
That would be right. Yeah.
That might be. Yeah. And I think actually Bill works for the TOPS lab as well. The TOPS lab actually maintains the state's crash database. So he actually has maybe a definite answer on that.
Bill, can you help us out here?
Thank you. You can see why I'm concerned.
Yeah. Bill, can you help us
Yeah,
answer?
I sure can. Yeah. Yang has hit it on the head. It has to be into the state database as only used that is received from law enforcement agencies. So our concern, Robbie, is we need to get to our city police to make sure that, as far as I'm concerned, if somebody is scraped up, that's a reportable crash that should be investigated by, or at least reported by the officers. And now maybe they were using the excuse that it was last Friday when they were having lots of fender benders and so forth. But that would be the only reason why they shouldn't. Maybe they could use as an excuse why they couldn't come out. But I think they should come out in those situations that you've referenced.
So apparently, according to the conversation with the police department, the guy called 911 and the 911 operator said that she wasn't gonna forward it to the police department because they don't come out for minor crashes.
Oh,
that's not right. There's something wrong. Maybe that 911 operator may have been given direction that a certain event was going on. In other words, either a bad, lots of snow crashes, lots of fender benders, and so forth. And the police department may give the 911 operator conditions and say, okay, we're under a condition now where we cannot get to anything. And in other words, there's got to be blood on the street before they'll go out into those conditions. But that should be a rare occurrence.
Well, Yang, would this be something that we could potentially talk about at a future quarterly traffic safety report in terms of what police response would be appropriate? Because crashes and injuries are part of what we're very interested in. And the case that Robbie's talking about, doesn't get analyzed or included in our data if the police do not respond. Or would that be appropriate, or would it be more appropriate for a separate topic? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. So I can definitely pass on the concern to our colleagues in MPD, and maybe they can also help to get a concern maybe to the other law enforcement agencies working in the city. So that definitely doesn't sound like very typical. My understanding that as long as there are injuries, people calls, they will respond. But maybe under some stressful events, they don't have resources. But I can definitely pass on feedback to them. Maybe give them a heads up that this question may come up at the quality traffic safety reports when we review those the crash data. Another point I want to kind of make is that I totally understand, for example, why the UW TOPS lab does not include self-report data, because it's very hard to verify those information, right? So anyone can go online to do a self-report, but how can they know all the information are accurate? So that's that's a good question to resolve. I think definitely self-reporting serves a really good purpose, and we hope to utilize more of those data. Maybe not official data reports like this, but as a reference when we work on our projects. We definitely use that, and we use just the informal complaints coming from the citizens, the residents. I think those are still useful. Not sure why those will be making their way into this this database. So I thought Bill has his hand up.
Bill, go ahead. You're muted, Bill.
Thanks, I'm sorry. The other big caveat that needs to be included in this report is that to even get into the report, a motor vehicle has to be involved. So if it's a bicycle hitting another bicycle, or a bicycle hitting a train, for instance, is not in this report. So it has to be a motor vehicle has to be involved to be in the state database. So there are limitations to this report, of which you need to recognize if you're going to use the report, that you're not going to have certain kind of conditions of certain kinds of crashes are not going to be in here.
Okay, very helpful, Bill. Other comments or questions? Robbie, does that help answer your questions?
Yes, definitely. And I had a feeling I knew the answer. I just wanted to be sure, because my concern was that, I know that self-report is difficult to verify, and so I can see why it's not included. But my concern was really more that when people are requesting that an official report be written, it's not being written because the police are not coming out. And I had 2 people in 10 days tell me that.
Okay.
And if I could just jump in, and another caveat is, if the crash occurs on private property in a parking lot, it's not in this report.
Yeah.
And how many crashes occur in a Walmart or a Woodman's shopping center that people want to have a police officer come to get a report, and very typically, unless somebody is injured, they won't come, regardless of the condition or regardless of the weather.
Okay. All good information to have. It did sound like people were injured, Robbie, in your instances, right?
Yeah, there were, well, one of them, he said it was pretty minor, and he said, I tried to call the police. I tried to get them to come out and do a report, and they refused to come out. And the driver was very apologetic. And he said, my injuries were not bad, but the other person, had a bad crash, and she actually went to the hospital later. There was no report. And that's also fairly common, especially if you're not in a car. You often don't feel your injuries until the adrenaline wears off.
Yeah.
At which point you and the driver may have left the scene, and you end up going to the emergency room or urgent care with an injury, and it's no longer a reportable crash. And that's what happened in the second case. She tried to call, and the police said, are you injured? And she said, I'm not sure. And they said, well, we're not going to come out if you're not hurt. And she just didn't have the force, I guess, to say, you need to come out.
Yeah.
And the driver left, she left, and then she ended up in urgent care.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a hole in what we would like to be collecting. And maybe we can figure out a way to address it. Clearly not going to get in the actual report because of everything everybody said. Let's go ahead.
If you need a motion, I'll move acceptance of the report.
That's great. Thanks. Is there a second to Chris's motion? Bill, is that a second?
I'll make a second to that motion.
Okay, and we'll follow up on all of these things that have been discussed. Did you wish to speak to the motion at all, Chris, or no?
No, I think it's been spoken about enough.
Enough, okay. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody wishes to object. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm seeing no hands, so thanks so much, Tom, for that. You have your follow-up now?
Yep, so this is the kind of the review of the 2020 crashes. So we've got the top 30 intersections as far as ranked out here by the number of 2020 crashes. So yeah, we've got and over on the right, we've got 2021 crashes. And then we've got comments and suggested reviews for each one. Some of these are, often the top crashes are under WSDOT's control. So we're not really able to make changes there, but quite a few of these are being studied by WSDOT now or planned for a project. One of the top ones here, I think that Johnson and Park Street. So that's where there's a lot of right turns from West Johnson to southbound Park. So yeah, it was ranked number 4 in 2020 and then number 7 this year. So that's one where we could consider doing something with the signals. And quite a few of these are looking at separating out left turns because left turns are often high crash frequency. Some of these already have projects planned. Stoughton Road, WSDOT is looking into reconstructing Stoughton Road. Let's see here. Gammon and Watts, we've got a highway safety improvement plan for that one, which just happened to be number 2 in 2020. Beltline and Gammon. So 2020 was the reconstruction of Gammon Road. So that's it looked like these crashes occurred during the reconstruction. So see, it went from 15 crashes in 2020 down to 5 in 2021. But I think, yeah, you can look at this in more detail. And if you have any suggestions or comments or want more data on any of these, we can provide that. We've got the diagrams for each one of these intersections. But yeah, so one other thing to mention is that BRT is changing quite a few of these. So East Washington, Mineral Point Road, there'll be changes with BRT, with lane configuration changes, pavement markings, signs, signal changes. So this is just kind of like one part that we'll use and combine with the high injury network. And when we evaluate projects for Safe Streets Madison, so we'll be using this when we come back with Safe Streets Madison in a couple months.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Tom? And if not tonight, you can get back to him at a later date as well. Okay, I'm seeing no hands, so we should be good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Okay, next we have Complete Green Streets, which we've all been anxiously waiting for. So welcome, Renee and Yang. You want to go ahead?
All right, I think Tom is going to kick it off, actually.
Okay, welcome, Tom.
I get my first 45 seconds.
Okay, we'll time you.
Yeah. So actually, if you think about it, the US DOT released its policy on highway classifications in 1938. And so that's where we got the arterial, the collector, the local street. That type of classification was a basis for design. It was carried forward in the 1950 AASHTO Blue Book, the 1957 Red Book, and then they kind of combined all of these into the 1984 AASHTO Green Book, right? And so, Bill, you and I, when we went to school, we had the first Green Book, and the problem with it is,
Tom, I had the Blue Book. I'm sorry.
All right, you're just dating yourself. You're just dating yourself. I wasn't going to admit that. I'm a Green Book. But for 80 years, our street design has been focused on these classifications that address moving motor vehicles, right? And And that's, that comes out in our level of service calculations, our clear zone, lateral offsets. It's all based on being inside of a metal tube. And how does that affect you? But our cities are changing, right? And they're much more vibrant. And so what we are hoping to do with Complete Green Streets is to change the paradigm from moving cars and vehicles to moving people, right? And providing access across the modes. And I think that the one goal is that, we always have challenges, right of way to right of way. And we have difficulty making decisions on what's the most important thing. And the Complete Green Streets Guide hopefully will give us a framework for us, and particularly, I'm going to say in particularly, the Transportation Commission in making decisions for street design, both, the reconstructions, but also the new street design in our periphery. All right, so that was 1 minute and 30 seconds. I apologize. Renee, why don't you go ahead?
All right. See, I give him a little bit of time, but then I keep track of it. All right, let me start this slideshow. Come on. All right, so let me switch to that. There we go. All right, I think we're good. I think those of you who are here tonight know I'm Renee Calloway. I'm the pedestrian bicycle administrator in traffic engineering. And I have been managing this project, but we have had an intradepartmental team working on this. So there have been a lot of different people involved helping put this together. But they gave me the joy of doing the committees. So, you guys are super familiar with why we might be working on this guide. We have certainly, we have policies, we have practices, we have some ordinance. We've had a complete streets resolution for a long time. We're kind of known for American cities, for US cities being, pedestrian and bicycle oriented, but we still have gone to bigger streets over time, with more space for people who are driving, for storing cars, and got away from kind of the older streets that we're all familiar with, that are in the older parts of the city. And this brings up some concerns. We have these wide streets. You were just talking about it tonight, right? They end up not having high parking utilization. People drive faster. You've certainly heard that a million times. And then the next thing you know, these streets are on our Safe Streets Madison list. And they might even be relatively new streets. I'm always surprised. I'll get the name of a street with a request and I'll look. Sometimes Google Street View, it's not even really on there completely yet. And that's what we're trying to change. That's what we've been trying to change, right? As a committee, we've been trying to turn that upside down and build streets right the first time. Many of you are familiar with Complete Streets. We're trying to build streets that allow people, everyone, no matter how they're choosing to travel, to do that. There's not one design. We've definitely been bringing forward Complete Streets. They don't all look the same. They take into consideration the context, the differing priorities of streets. But we know that they are focused on safety, comfortable places to be, and that they allow access for everyone. And then we've brought in the green streets because we know that's such an important thing for sustainability, for ultimately the resilience of our city. Those need to be thought about at every time that we're looking at a street. So that kind of brings that into the mix more officially. So you probably saw this where you got to look at the guide. We're really trying to center community values, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. To have more direction on priorities, I think that will be helpful for staff, for the committee, as you are making decisions and approving things. Having these street types to help as a starting point, right? And also that we're explicit about equity and this idea that you don't have to know about a street feature to get that street feature. You shouldn't have to ask for a tree. You shouldn't have to ask for speed management. That should be something that's being considered across the city, regardless of what neighborhood you're living in. And then I think this last point is very important, particularly for this committee. is that this is something that isn't static. A guide like this isn't a one-time and done. This is something that will need to change and evolve as the city evolves, as design guidance evolves, as knowledge and ideas around green infrastructure evolve, that this guide will need to evolve as well. So, we've talked here, I won't go into it too much, but, this idea that streets are for humans, that they should be the right size, and that we really need the sustainability part of green infrastructure. So the TPPB has been working on this for quite a while. They have been the lead committee. We've been at this for a couple of years, working on different parts of it. And so we kind of are at a point where we feel like this is a product that we can move forward with, and then we can continue to refine from that starting point. So I just wanted to talk briefly about the engagement. We did do 3 phases. First, just learning what people kind of valued, reflecting back to see if we kind of understood what they told us and that we were on the right track. And then once we built out the guide, kind of testing that with people. We did a lot of things that are pretty typical since the pandemic. We had virtual open house, a virtual webinar. Those were both recorded, so people who weren't there could watch them. We did a lot of online surveying. A lot of that was just for anyone, the general public. We did have one focused particularly on people with disabilities. And then we put kind of the primary effort into having through each phase a series of focus groups to talk specifically with people of color and low-income residents who were not coming to our virtual meetings, who were not taking our online surveys, which is pretty typical with other planning efforts like this. So we worked with Equity by Design and Annette Miller, who is really has a lot of really great contacts in the community, does this work for us. And she really ensured that we were getting those voices heard and that we were reflecting that in our work. So that's where we put kind of that extra effort. So I'm going to go through the process of how this whole guide works. I'm not going to walk through every single page in the guide, but just kind of the highlights. And first, I want to say that when we did that engagement and we asked about values, on the left here is a graphical representation of what we heard and then what we reflected back to people, and they said, yes, that captured what they were thinking. So that is kind of built into this whole guide. Now on the right is our modal hierarchy. And if you maybe were at some of our earlier meetings, it has been people walking or using mobility devices at the top, transit, which operates on a much more limited set of streets, followed by people biking. And then at one point in time, the parking was below the other kind of like moving vehicles. After some discussion at TPPB, we did kind of move it up because it kind of didn't feel right as its own slot either. That is definitely, I think, a lot of discussion about what's the right fit for that. That's where it sits right now. And then this is kind of how it all fits together. The modal hierarchy and the values kind of are infused throughout the whole thing. So when you get to the end, you should still feel like that's a right fit for those values in that hierarchy. But we kind of have a process with these street types, these kind of overlays, which also help with street priority setting, these charts that deal with space allocation, and then ultimately getting to, after you go back to the priorities if needed to make trade-offs, this idea that you would have this design. It isn't necessarily, there's not necessarily just one design that might do those things. There could be more than one, right? But that's kind of the process you would do to get to that final design element. So I'll just go through this a little bit more. Some of you have seen this chart, but there's 11 street types that they are focused more on context of the street. What is that street like, or what do we want that street to be like? As I say here, this isn't what the street looks like now. These are aspirational. Over time, we'll have tons more examples that are what these look like, but This is what we want a given street to look like. And these serve as kind of a starting point for that design process. Each of those street types is broken up into 3 zones. The travelway, which is kind of more of the traditional movement. It is the transit. It is generally where biking happens, and it's where motor vehicle driving would happen. We have the flex zone, which is a bit more of the stationary uses. It's the trees, it's the green infrastructure, it's the parking, transit stops, bike parking, street cafes, kind of those stationary things are going to be part of that flex zone. It incorporates, both sides of the curb if parking is included. And then there's the walkway where pedestrians use that space. It also could be a shared use path. So sometimes that biking might happen in the walkway. So each of those 11 street types are like this urban avenue example where you're going to have a pretty basic graphic. We didn't have enough money to really build out the fanciest maybe graphics in the country, but we have pretty good ones that give us a good feel for what this street would look like. They're color coded to fit with what those zones are. Each of those zones is going to have a priority to help with that design start. It's not as simple as low, medium, and high for everyone. As you can see in this example, sometimes there's going to be 2 that are high, adding, some challenge to that design work. There's also a sort of a brief description that goes with each one and with each of those priorities. And then what we have is just a starting point, an initial map that maps these out. It doesn't map every single neighborhood yield street or every neighborhood street, but sort of your collectors and above, we've generally mapped. These are a starting point. You might see a project come and maybe it's recommended to be a different street type. There'll also be the planning department will use this quite heavily in their sub area plans. So they will come and they've started to, just do this a little bit, even though it hasn't been approved, this guide hasn't been approved, but kind of saying it might be like this street type. And so we'll see more of that once this is approved. So the next part is these overlays. It's kind of a weird word, but it's kind of priorities that overlay onto that street map. So I'll talk about those. Here are all 6 of them. They influence those design priorities of that street. So first is equity, and this is a little bit more of a process and sort of tracking kind of priority. We're starting out saying all of the neighborhood resource teams are equity priority areas, and then we're going to work with civil rights and our data team who've kind of been looking at those already to see where might be the logical expansions, because we know that there are some. And these are areas where we're going to take a few extra steps. We're going to document things more to ensure those equitable outcomes across the city. And you'll see here, we're always going to be looking if this is within or near an equity priority area. As we build out some other areas, we may have some things that are not neighborhood resource teams. But these are going to have some extra engagement steps, more collaboration across departments, more reviewing what other departments have heard, and some things on this checklist that I'll talk about later that we'll fill out to be able to track this. Now we have the transit priority network, and this is going to be based, you guys just, has just been a process to approve new routes. So these are all the ones that are in red. You're probably pretty familiar with this map. And these are the ones with at least 15-minute weekday midday service, where we're going to say transit is a high priority on these. And we're going to be looking at things like transit lanes, signal changes, making sure, we want everywhere to have accessible bus stops, but these are going to be the ones that, are going to need more space, maybe for a bus rapid transit station. A transit station. So, these are going to be those locations where this isn't going to be the trade-off. We're going to look at other things when trade-offs need to be made. We also have something that I think is really going to be super important, and we've been needing this, which is our all ages and ability bike network. And these are the places that are the most critical for having that complete network where someone doesn't have to be like the super cyclist. They could be anyone getting on a bike, haven't really ridden before, who are going to feel like they can ride across the city. It's connected. They can get to those critical destinations. This is also going to be where kind of, you might say, the line in the sand for trade-offs, right? These are going to be designed to be that high level, all ages and abilities. You're going to see on busier streets, this is where we're going to say we're going to need those protected bike lanes. We're certainly not saying that we're not going to try to meet those same qualities on any street, because all of our streets should be bike friendly. But if we're needing to make trade-offs, this is not the network where this is going to happen. I think we have a lot more work that we can do on this. This is, if you may have noticed, we're starting out with an interim map. We're saying that we would, once this guide is approved, we would start working on finalizing that map. It's really based on work that was done in 2015 with bike planning, with a few, kind of key edits for things that have changed since then. But there is work to do on this, but I think it can be a critical way to build out that all ages and ability network, to make those design decisions and to really take our system to that next level. It also, I think, provides us an opportunity to find those priority gaps and get those gaps programmed in our TIP, in our applications for funding, in our Safe Streets Madison. So I think this can be really important. And this is an element, as you may have noticed, that will be coming back to the Transportation Commission for that update and for, getting this up to the level that we want it to be completely up to date. Now, I just also wanted to pull this out. I know that Harold had mentioned this. You guys have seen on the right there that all ages and abilities chart that's in NACTO. And what we're saying is what the guide says currently is that on the right, we have kind of one that is from the federal highways. It's not exactly the one that's in their guide. It's one that TOOL uses quite a bit with communities. It is kind of provides a little flexibility around the edges. And for example, like on a bike boulevard, I mentioned here Mifflin Street. Mifflin Street has some parts of it that are at 2,000 or less, but it does have some sections that are 2,400. So this kind of gives us up to that 3,000 mark of that little flexibility, which I feel is in line with what we've been doing. It feels like it's in line. I was looking at some things that Cambridge has in some of their guidance, and they have kind of that similar sort of buffer at the edge. So we feel like, since this is going to be kind of that line in the sand, that a little flexibility at the edges that's a little different than NACTO feels like a good fit for the all ages and ability. In talking to some other people, it felt like it was in line with the Crow manual, which is the Dutch manual, which has a little bit of flexibility. So that's something, though, that Harold did bring up as something that, was a concern, because we have been talking about the NACTO guide a lot and showing that, even though I feel like we do kind of blur the edges a little bit. It also has a tree canopy priority. There was a task force, the Urban Forestry Task Force, that did a lot of work, and they set this goal of having 40% tree canopy coverage across the city. And they also said that there needed to be some work to figure out how to take that down to the neighborhood level to prioritize trees. So this has a way of finding where are the areas that have lower tree canopy, prioritizing those for terraces that will sustain like larger canopy trees, and also some guidance on how to use some kind of new technology. Like if you've been at the municipal building out on Martin Luther King, there's some some technologies that are used to kind of support trees in those kind of concrete environments to ensure their long-term health. So there's also some guidance in there on that. And this really supports some of the things that were in the Urban Forestry Task Force report, which has many, many things that are still to come, but this helps with some areas of that and ensures we're really considering trees throughout our project. I also probably should say it doesn't mean that there won't be trees in non-priority areas. We still would continue to follow all of our current processes for, kind of improving tree health in project. There's also kind of this decision-making flow chart for green infrastructure to ensure that we're really thinking about it and we're finding those really viable locations and building out appropriate, putting in the appropriate green infrastructure. Many of you probably maybe live in neighborhoods that have had or will soon have stormwater studies, and this really is helping support that work. It's really ensuring that it kind of just built into the whole process. The 11 street types have kind of different types of green infrastructure that might work on those street types, and that's built into this as well. And then our last one is just reality. It's kind of our lowest priority of all the overlays, but it is real. We have streets that are a national highway system route. They require us to collaborate with the DOT and the MPO on making changes. We also have truck routes where we're telling trucks this is where they should be traveling. And so we need to account for that when we're making our designs because they're these, pose different design challenges. All right. So that is how you kind of get to that identifying the design priorities. And then there are the charts for the space allocation. These have width and suggestions for all of them to kind of help us get to where we want to be. And these are, in line with things that you've been seeing and then you would be seeing going forward. We have all of these right-of-way widths. The typical is based on what our preferred is for all of these. So if we were doing a new street type, we would know that to get our preferred street, that's where we would want to be with our right-of-ways. And then at one of the TPPB meetings, actually this came up at the Board of Public Works. They said that, speed management is such an important component of these projects because we really are trying to design streets to the speed limit. And so we have this chart that also provides a little additional guidance for people to think about what kinds of speed management techniques might you do with the 11 street types. And then, as I said, you would go back to those design priorities if you're doing a reconstruction and not everything kind of adds up perfectly. Ultimately getting to a design or, maybe a couple designs, depending on the street. Then a little bit about implementation and the resolution that is attached to this. The Transportation Commission is listed as having quite a few responsibilities, not surprisingly. And one of them is that projects that vary from this guide would need to have approval by the TC if they were to go forward outside of those parameters. Also, you would have the ability to modify the Complete Green Streets policy guide on an annual basis as we come upon things that aren't working, right? Some of the green items and the tree items do have, they're also under the Board of Public Works. But generally, this is something that sits with the Transportation Commission. You would approve updates to the Transit Priority Network when there are changes to the system and to the All Ages and Ability Network as we build it out next year and into the future. Sub-area plans, as I mentioned, would have street types from this guide. And if they varied from the guide, those would go to the Transportation Planning and Policy Board. And then there would be some revisions. Section 33 is the committee responsibility, so that will need to be updated if this is approved, when this is approved. And then section 16 is the subdivision ordinance. And what we would want to ensure is that those are in line with each other going forward, because that has some very specific numbers in it. And so we would want to bring them in alignment with this guide to make the process of development easier and more straightforward and kind of fit with what we want to see. And then I have mentioned, I don't know, that checklist, I mentioned that earlier. This is something that we will be, after this is approved, working to finalize this and start kind of implementing that. You know, a lot of projects are already in the works. I mean, you've been seeing them already. So this year it's not really going to be sort of that full implementation, but we'll kind of get started on this. And then, you know, with the next year's projects, we would have a full implementation. But the idea is this is kind of a full record of what happens with the project. There will be some equity pieces that we'll be recording, and it will be able to help us, you know, ensure that we're proceeding in an equitable fashion. It will help with finding the things that we may want to change, right? This will be sort of that way of tracking all of that and helping as we look to continuously keep this guide updated. All right, I think most of you probably know how to get a hold of me. But yeah, I tried to kind of not take the whole evening, but give those of you who haven't seen the presentation before kind of a full flavor for the guide.
Okay, excellent presentation, Renee. I like how you've been tailoring it to each of the committees. I wasn't able to listen to Board of Public Works, but I did listen to Plan Commission on Monday. So nice job. So comments or questions for Renee? Robbie, go ahead.
So I am going to sort of channel Harold a little bit since he can't speak tonight. And I think he does bring up some very good concerns. I was a little bit confused when you went through the presentation as far as the FHWA versus the NACDO versus the CRO, and what exactly you were saying. Are you saying that the city has made its own set of sort of street types that is somewhere in between FHWA and NACDO? I guess I'm just wondering, because NACDO definitely has more options and more sort of different types of facilities. I think the FHWA was a big step for FHWA, but I think that it still was sort of a compromise and not necessarily something we should accept as appropriate for a city like Madison. So I just want to know exactly what's the blue one? What does that mean?
Yeah. Maybe I can give a little bit of a background, okay, and then Renee give more. You know, while it was it's in FHWA's manual, it was developed by Tool. So, you know, bicycle professionals, national, do that. We had a pretty robust staff discussion. Do we show the table, right? Or do we show a graphic? We felt like it's probably more understandable to show the graphic. And there are some values in the table that we maybe would modify. And I'll give you an example. If I remember correctly, all ages and abilities, you know, the bicycle boulevard cuts off at 1,500 vehicles per day, right? So that means, depending on the traffic count that we have, does that mean that we stop Mifflin as being a bicycle boulevard? Do we stop Jennifer Street as being a bicycle boulevard? Because there are sections of Jennifer that are 2,000, right? So we feel like, no, they, you know, those two streets can be improved, you know what I mean? But, you know, they can be bicycle boulevards. And so we and so that would mean, well, do we change NACTO guidance, and then do we make our own table with 2000 and 2000 is such a strict number, right? Because you could make that count. You could take that count on a Tuesday and get 1700, and you could take that count on a Wednesday and maybe get 2100, right? And yet that one count is what we end up using for design. So I think we felt like, and we actually had a fair amount of discussion on this, with Tool, and I think people like Jim, who's going to be leading engineering, felt like the graph was just allowed us more options, right? More options. And so it's not like we are trying to diminish NACTO standards. We're just trying to say, there are streets that maybe are a little bit more than what that table would say, right? That still can function well. Tool, who developed this, actually, they were the ones that said that the FHWA guidance was a little bit closer to what Crow was doing rather than NACTO. Crow, if you look at their manuals, I'm going to paraphrase, but oftentimes they say get what you can, you know what I mean? And they don't put hard lines in the sand, and they will allow for small adjustments or small infringements. So that's perhaps my long-winded answer. Renee probably will provide a more succinct and informative answer.
I did just want to point out one thing. This one in the middle, the blue, that is kind of what Federal Highway shows. So it's more blurry. This was something that Tool had made originally, and it has a harder line, but the lines are a little bit different than the NACTO. And I think the thing is, you'll see here in the footnote, 2000 being still preferred, which NACTO says at 20, you can go up to 2000, but we have that hard cut off for sort of that bike boulevard or shared lane at 3000, which does fit with a lot of the projects that we've been doing. So this orangish red is the one that is in the guide, and it does have those kind of hard lines versus the Federal Highways, which went with more of a blurred image. But the NACTO is the one that you have been seeing, that we do talk about, but we haven't been treating it in the past without this guide as a hard sort of line in the sand. Does that help, Robbie?
Okay, well, yes, I think there's still a couple of things that we're missing. Number one, first of all, when I looked at the red one in our slide projection, our presentation, I thought, okay, well, is that the posted speed limit or the actual limit, the actual speed that people go on the road? Those are way big differences, especially when you get out onto, the periphery. So that's one. Number two, the number of curb cuts. How do we decide that? I was looking at the all ages and abilities map, and there's an awful lot of suburban areas with a lot of curb cuts. Mineral Point Road, I cannot imagine any way that we're going to make that an all ages and abilities road because of the number of strip malls and curb cuts. Because if you take an off-road path, they're going across all those driveways. And on-road, I just can't imagine that being all ages and abilities in any sense of the imagination. So sort of there, it's like, how do we deal with that on the periphery, which I think that the NACTO guide does a better job of looking at those areas. But then the other thing they do is they look at curbside activities such as number of people pulling out of parking stalls, pickups and drop-offs. How do we factor in? And this gets to the other concern that Harold had with the parking being at the same level as some of the other moving uses. I'm thinking about a lot of places where we have a lot of curbside activity because of food delivery, ride share, and cabs, even bus pullouts and things like that, where there's a lot of curbside conflict that might make it difficult to use something that is only based on speed and volume. So I'm just kind of asking, like, how are we factoring those things in?
Right. And I should say that this guide does do something. It's maybe not the thing that jumps out at people is it does adopt those NACDO guides as design guides that the city would also use in our projects. So although we're saying, it's right now saying that this on the left, this sort of chart would be the line in the sand for all ages and abilities. It is also saying that those NACDO guides are official guidebooks that the city would use in our process, which is something that we have not done before, is adopt those as guides.
Okay, well, that's helpful. And how are we dealing, moving on from bicycle facilities, but how are we dealing with things like curbside activity and what seems to be an increasing number of unofficial drivers pulling into the curb and pulling out and, making the decision as to where we allocate space for both ride share and delivery vehicles that are not like trucks delivering to businesses.
Yeah. So we will, it's on our work plan to develop a curb management policy. San Francisco has an amazing one. They have a really good one. But I will say, we have a lot of irons in the fire. We have 3 times more irons in the fire than I think we've ever had. So we have to kind of do these things sequentially. So it is on our work plan for 23, but Amtrak is also, and that's a high priority. And so I'm going to say that probably this guide probably isn't perfect. Like it's not. I think Harold's comment regarding the bike network, that's true. And I look at that map, I say, oh, there should be a line here and there should be a line there. Protected intersections that way too. However, I feel like it's a good guide. It's a good guide. It gets us in a different direction. I'm afraid, personally, I'm afraid if we wait for the perfect, we won't be able to implement the very good. You know what I mean? And we have, the Transportation Commission has an enormous amount of responsibility and power. Really anything that deviates from this, you have to approve, and then you have the option to change this. And it will be changed. I don't know if you've looked at all those tables. There's just an enormous number of tables, and there's a lot of numbers in those tables, and we think they're right, but they might not. There might be a little section where it's not, and that's where we would probably be coming back to. Again, that I think Harold has some valid points. I think we are going to try and press and get everything we can. But if we wait for like a curb management policy, a protected intersection policy, and things just might not. We might not get to enjoy the benefits of what this provides right now.
Okay, I mostly just wanted to hear you say that it was on your radar.
Yeah.
And that that the 2015 MPO bike. I look at that map and I'm like, come on. First of all, the MPO never had the granularity for the bike network that they needed. they're looking at too large an area. And, we've always needed a better, a more granular look. But I also did want to just say, I am really happy that this is happening. And I'm really thankful for everybody that worked on it. So I don't want you to hear criticisms or questions, I should say, as criticisms. They're more sort of me making sure that these things don't fall by the wayside in the future. And I'm really appreciative of how good the guide is. And I'm glad that we'll be able to improve it in the future, because I think there are still some things that need to be considered. And so that's I'm putting my hand down now. Thank you.
In many
Okay.
ways, this might be consistent with your comments on the TDM program, where you said it's pretty good. There's some things I would change. So this is in the same category, right?
Okay, Chris, before we go on to you, we do have a registrant, and I should have stopped us before we went into questions, but I was just so enthusiastic and wanted to hear from people that I skipped right by. So apologize to the registrant. So Aiden, who do we have?
All right. So we have Alexander Harding of Wyota Avenue, Madison, registered in support and wishes to speak.
Okay, you have 3 minutes. Thanks. Go ahead. And thanks for waiting with us.
Hi, yeah, so I support this plan, but I have two concerns. My first concern is on page 25 of the Complete Green Streets Guide, where I am concerned about using the Federal Highway Administration All Ages, All Abilities table, specifically because it doesn't take into account the number of lanes per direction. And I think if there are multiple lanes per direction, there needs to be a protected bike lane. I think that simply needs to be the cost of having multiple car lanes per direction in a place where people on bikes and on foot are present, period. So I strongly recommend using the NACTO All Ages, All Abilities table instead of the Federal Highway Administration. I think that better reflects what all ages, all abilities actually means. Kind of in lieu of that, you could like put an addendum that says if there's multiple lanes, just put in a protected bike lane, regardless of volumes. And so, yeah, I don't see a world where a protected bike gutter next to multiple lanes per directions feels safe for all ages, all abilities. Well, there's no world where I would let an 8-year-old bike on a 4-lane road, period, regardless of volume. And pretending that that's all ages, all abilities is just, I don't think it's fair. My second concern is regarding the street zone allocation chart. Specifically, I'm concerned with there being no differentiation other than an asterisk on the chart between a raised crosswalk across a street versus parallel to it. So an example is University Avenue would be classified as an urban avenue, and thus it would have raised crosswalks, would not be allowed to cross it, which I think is fine. But I think on these large, wide streets are places where it's critical to put raised crosswalks parallel to the street across intersecting minor side streets, which slows drivers down, turning in and out, and is important for the safety of people on bikes and foot that are traveling along the urban avenues. So I was actually, I was just hit riding a bike at the intersection of John Nolan Drive and Rimrock on the shared use path, and I made a video on that. And a raised crossing parallel to John Nolan Drive for the path would have been critical for signaling drivers turning off a high-speed street that you need to slow down and look for people walking and cycling. So yeah, please differentiate between a raised crossing parallel versus across. And yeah, I think there's a huge difference between the two. And I think on those large urban avenues, it actually should be like required. But yeah, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there questions for the registrant? Okay, thanks. We very much appreciate your thoughts. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I did want to come back to the infamous all ages and abilities chart one last time.
You want to put that back up, Renee?
You don't have to if you don't want, but I was just going to say that the conversation we had about it, it was much more helpful than what's on the page. I think the hard lines convey some sort of certainty that isn't supposed to be there. And like Harold and the registrant said, like this only applies if it's a single lane each direction. So I think there's improvements that could be made that would make this a lot more clear. I guess I have a question about process though, since this is going through all the bodies now and Public Works and TPB and so on. Should we not be recommending any last minute tweaks to this process wise, knowing that it will be a living document, or where do we live in the process right now?
You know, I don't know. I do know that Board of Public Works passed, I think, an amended resolution that requires us to come back to the TC for revisions in 18 months. So
okay, yeah, I was curious what board. I know what Plan Commission did. They passed it unanimously. So could you clarify what Board of Public Works passed, please?
Yeah, I think they passed it as is with this would actually be in the resolution. So this would be in the resolution that that in addition to the Transportation Commission having the authority to revise a complete streets guide, that there would be a kind of a review and revision after one design cycle had been used, which is essentially about 18 months from now, you know, in the summer of 24. So that was that's what they passed. I think you could, you know, if it seems like the sticking point is with page 25, right? So I wonder if we could I wonder if we could just put a note and just say multiple lanes in a single direction warrant a protected facility, you know, and we just maybe add that. I can't imagine an instance where we would not be recommending a protected facility with multiple lanes, particularly if you look at all the projects that you've seen. But if I feel like that, if that one sentence provides a little bit more comfort, I think that would be easy to do.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm thinking is just clarification that this figure is not like the governing principle, but actually like a conceptualization of what is in those guidelines that we're pointing to at the end of this document. I think that would be helpful, and that it doesn't capture everything. So if we can do that, I think that would be probably great.
So could we, Chris, can I just stop you for a second? So what I hear people asking, and you know, whether we make this in the motion or not, it you know, we may want to, would be to add a clarifying footnote to the charts on page 25 of the guide with regard to protected bike lanes and how the chart should be used, something like that. And we can work out that language, but is that what I'm hearing from people? Is that would be helpful? Because I haven't heard of a situation where we've had multiple lanes in one direction where we haven't felt like a protected bike lane was necessary. I haven't seen that happen at TC. Does anybody recall a situation where we have had that happen? I can't. So we'll just have to figure out a way to say that. So Tom, you know, we could maybe add that in as you know, and what Board of Public Works is suggesting certainly sounds good as well. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The only other thing, since we're talking about, we've sort of called attention to the list of guides in the back. I am kind of wondering, maybe it's not important what the intention of pointing to them is. there is one that comes to mind that's not in the list. So maybe we should just keep that in the queue for later inclusion or something. And that's ITE's designing walkable urban thoroughfares guide. I think it's consistent with these for the most part, but it does have some additional helpful stuff like pretty clear discussion about target speeds and the relation of streets to buildings. So maybe just for later consideration. And it is a recommended practice from ITE, so it has a little more weight than NACTO.
Okay, is that all you had, Chris? Okay, other comments or questions? Okay, so we will need a motion to move this forward. So what, I'll entertain a motion. And we can work out how we want to incorporate the clarifying footnote on page 25. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the motion would be to approve the Complete Streets Guide with the city considering how to add a note to page 25 to give more clarity on the relationship of the diagram to other guidelines.
Okay, so a motion to approve Complete Green Streets Guide and recommend the resolution to the council, obviously, with the city considering how to add a note to page 25 to add clarity. Can't read my own writing here, to how the chart relates to the various guidelines. Does that sum it up? Anything you'd like to change in that, Chris?
No, that sounds good to me.
Okay, do we have a second? Darren, is that a second?
It is.
Okay, thanks. Chris, do you want to speak to your motion?
No, other than to just sort of repeat what Robbie said is I think this is a great addition to the city. Maybe not perfect yet, but I think it's going to be very useful for the Transportation Commission and for engineering and for the city at large. So very excited.
Let me just ask you one thing, Chris and Darren. Did you want to also support the change recommended by the Board of Public Works? That there be a review after one design cycle? Tom had a very long explanation of that, but basically that we'd support the amendment recommended by the Board of Public Works, which is basically to review it again in about 18 months. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, that's correct.
I don't know if it helps for TC to also sort of endorse that. I'm fine with adding that if there's no objections from anyone else.
Tom and Yang and Renee, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I think I don't know if it can be used as a substitute, but I think it could be used as an alternate, and then the TPPB will be discussing this on Monday, right? And so then they'll have two bodies that recommend that. Seems fine.
Yeah. Is it okay to call it an amendment? For the amendment recommended by the Board of Public Works?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve the Complete Green Streets Guide and support the resolution, with the city considering how to add a note to page 25, the infamous page 25, to add clarity to how the chart relates to the various guidelines, and also TC supports the amendment recommended by the Board of Public Works. I got that all right? Okay. Aiden, you good with what we have there?
Yep, I am.
Okay, great. All right, discussion. Okay, I'm seeing no hands. All right, I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote of our long motion, unless somebody wants me to repeat it again. Unless I see any raised hands with an objection, or if somebody wants a roll call vote. Okay, the motion passes unanimously. I am a huge supporter of Complete Green Streets. I think you all have done an excellent job. It is like transportation demand management, a continual process. TC is lucky to be the party that's responsible for making changes in the future. So to see those continuous improvements that we've talked about, but this is going to add, I think, clarity to the process. I think it's going to make the process more predictable for everybody. And I just would like to pass my thanks along to everybody for all the hard work that has gone into this. Because TC's been begging for this. So we really appreciate it. So thanks so much. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks you, project manager Renee. Okay, we will go on to crossover report. Chris, do you want to take it?
Yeah, as it was the 5th, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
transportation demand management and transit oriented development is what I have in my notes.
Yep, that's right. So the TPB recommended the transportation demand management program, which then went on to Common Council and was approved. And then the TOD overlay, it's sort of upzoning and loosening parking requirements and that sort of thing near TOD or near transit. TPPB recommended that for approval. However, recommended including historic districts, which at one point were or are currently not included in that.
That's kind of a hot button, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, short version is that there was some concerns that it could be considered an impact of BRT, but FTA said that probably wasn't the case, and TPPB, or at least some folks at TPPB, felt that the provisions in the TOD overlay applied to historic districts just like anywhere else, and those developments would still have to go through landmark review. So
okay, great, thanks. Anybody have any questions for Chris? And I dropped my agenda down on the floor. There we go. Too many complete green papers there. Okay, so that's item 10. Thank you. And as noted, Complete Green Streets goes to TPBB on Monday. So we'll move on to item 11, general announcements. The BRT groundbreaking is tomorrow at noon at the Brayton parking lot at 1 South Butler Street. You should have received an invitation from Aiden. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend. I really would like to, but I have something that I cannot change. So I'm actually triple booked at that time. So, but people are welcome to come. If anybody needs the invitation again, please let Aiden know and he can ship it back out to you. Does anybody have any other announcements? Okay. Thanks. The ordinance requires. I'm just getting too anxious throwing things down that I haven't even talked about yet. The ordinance, the ethics ordinance, requires that we put it on our agenda every year to remind members to fill out your statement of interest form. And I think everybody on TC does a great job of this. You should have received it from from the city clerk. If you need additional information, Aiden can certainly hook you up with the right people. And the main reason to make sure you get it in by January 3rd, 2023 is, and I have seen this happen, is that if you don't submit it, it will ultimately lead to the revocation of your commission appointment. So again, I haven't seen this be a problem with TC members, but we're obligated to put that reminder on the agenda. Anybody have any questions about the statement of interest form? Okay. Next we have future agenda items. Again, those are in Legistar for the January 11th, 2023 meeting. Which doesn't have as much on it as we've had at our past meetings. So we'll look forward to hopefully having some shorter meetings in the future. Anybody have any future agenda items that you would like to add that either aren't in our work plan or reflected on what's in Legistar? No? Okay. All right. Well, let me just wish everybody safe and happy holidays, because I likely won't see you before. And thanks so much for sticking with us through these long meetings that we've had. We've gotten an amazing amount accomplished over the past few meetings, that's for sure. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. The last meeting of 2022. All right, we have Darren and Chris. Motion and a second. I'm assuming unanimous consent vote. And thanks so much, everybody. And again, safe and happy holidays. Take care.